Okay, Polly, that's everybody in that's in.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome and thank you for joining us here today. My name is Carrillo, and alongside my colleague, Dr. Victor Olisa, we're really pleased to be moderating the session today. With particular thanks to the London Policing College and colleagues and partners to continue these conversations from the previous workshop that we had in October with regards to a focus on domestic abuse. So the purpose of these talks, these events, is to really walk the shoes of others, to understand, to learn, and to hear the insights and experiences of those who are working to try and find solutions when it comes to domestic abuse and the safeguarding of victims and survivors for the future. So we're really glad and really pleased to be here today to have these really important discussions. So before I start, just a bit of housekeeping. This event will be recorded, and we would ask if everyone could, who's not speaking, to remain on mute and turn off your video in order to allow for bandwidth not to be affected. Now, we know that this is a quite an emotive topic, so if anyone is affected by the issues that we're dealing with today, please do take some time away from your screen. If you need access to any support, then if you contact the hosts through a direct message, we'll send through some referral links. And of course, it's about having a safe space for us to have these really important conversations. So these, and please do use the chat to post any questions you have, any observations or any feedback as we're going along. So this is a conference of two halves. The first section is going to be, you will hear from a stellar lineup of experts through personalised presentations. Following those presentations, we will then go on to a panel discussion, which will take place and be moderated by Victor Olisa. So two of our speakers from the panel, Richard and Chris and Elizabeth, have to unfortunately leave a bit early today. So if you do have any questions for them specifically, please do use the chat function to post those questions. And please also do refer to the conference brochure with regards to the biographies for all of our speakers. So in setting the scene for today's session, we know that as levels of domestic abuse continue to rise, so too are the calls to ensure that policing responses to this crime are proportionate and effective. Domestic abuse is an invasive and difficult crime and takes considerable time and effort to deal with. The police have experienced many challenges over the pandemic and moved resources to enhance their response, but the strain to the front line is quite evident. And this is likely to lead to a less than satisfactory response for victims. But at the same time as coming under increasing scrutiny about their approach, policing has highlighted the resource requirements to deal with domestic abuse far outstrips their supply. So this conference is very much looking to provide some valuable insights from a range of experts, professionals and practitioners to explore some of these challenges, experiences and post-pandemic solutions of policing responses to domestic abuse. So without further ado, I would like to move on to our first speaker of the day, Chief Superintendent Richard North. Richard, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. I'm just going to open up my screen, so I'll do that first.
So the question really start with you, is whether we should actually.
Has that come through yet?
Not yet, no.
Best laid plans, isn't it? That's right. Let me turn my video off and see if that helps. It worked in practice, didn't it? That was the...
It did indeed.
Let me try again. I'll turn my... Right, let's try that. Yeah, I can't seem to share. I don't know if it's because the width is so much greater with everyone else in. I don't know if Polly, if you're able to share it your side and do it that way. Sorry, it's just not coming through.
That's okay. Well, Polly, send it to me very quickly and I'll do it.
Okay, well, while we're getting those slides up, I might as well make a start. Apologies about that. We did try it beforehand and it didn't. It worked very smoothly, but maybe it's the bandwidth through the system with the additional guests on there. So, but thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to come and speak to you. So my name is Richard North. I'm a Chief Superintendent from Western Midlands Police, and I'm in charge of Force Response, which is a force-wide corporate department in charge of 1,400 uniform officers that respond to incidents that the public call us about. They could be a whole range of different incidents. So, and the way we're contacted to deploy those officers would normally be through 999 calls and 101. As a result of the way we're structured, my staff attend initially around 90 to about 95% of all domestic incidents are reported to us. And as a consequence, that's why I think I've been asked to come and give, a short input today to kind of talk around some of the challenges we're facing around that initial response to domestic abuse. So some of the things I'm going to touch on, I haven't got loads of slides, but it is to touch on that demand that we're facing in this area. And its increasing level and some of the challenges that it presents. I think Polly there talked at the beginning around that as a resourcing concern, and that is part of the story and part of the challenge that we face in trying to get enough resources to get to these incidents, make sure people are safe, and then subsequently to investigate them. But I think it's also around that the way I want to talk about how the way we record crime at the moment and the emphasis put on that is cluttering the landscape really and trying to affecting how effective we are at being able to prioritize, find those hidden crimes and really put the resources we do have against the most appropriate incidents for us to deal with and how we link into the criminal justice system and to think around some of those issues. In terms of that cause of demand, I'm going to primarily focus in on the way that we record crime. Obviously, there's people much more expert than me, I'm sure, on the call and some of the other speakers around why, domestic abuse is being reported more at this time. There could be, social reasons, more confidence in the police or other agencies, or, that feeling within the community that this is no longer something that will be accepted or tolerated. And that's a reason why some people may come forward. Sorry, let me just phone going off here. So as I say, my officers, they don't just attend domestic abuse, they attend all different types of crime, of all different incidents, from murder, burglary to robbery. That can cause its unique challenges in terms of making sure that our staff are appropriately trained. There's other challenges in terms of, as you're aware from austerity, we've had, nationally, I think around 20,000 officers taken out that are now going to be put in through uplift, which is really positive for us to have that, those resources return to us, but they will be at the beginning of their career journey from a different generation, and that also brings some benefits. So the people that are joining us have, younger in age, have grown up in a generation where domestic abuse understanding around it is arguably maybe higher. it's more consistently been unacceptable socially. They might intuitively know more about the new crimes that we deal with in terms of coercive control when they join the force. They might not know the specific legislation, but they might have an understanding how that domestic abuse isn't just about physical assault. It's about, you know, hidden crimes, that coercive control within relationships that can destroy people's lives. So in that sense, there's some real positives about the uplift of officers going forward. All of our
Richard,
officers.
sorry to interrupt, just to let you know your slides are up and we're on slide 2. If you want to just say next slide, please, we can move forward.
Oh, brilliant. I can see that. No, that's great. So if you keep it on that slide for the minute, and then I'll come on to explain that shortly. So yeah, as I say, my officers don't investigate. They don't investigate the crime subsequently. They complete what we describe as a primary investigation. So basically, when they attend those incidents, they seek to gather as much evidence as possible. They seek to arrest the suspect as soon as possible if that is, you know, appropriate in terms of the incident they've attended. There is that general commitment to take positive action in every case. Often that is in the form of arrest. And even if the victim isn't supportive of a prosecution, you know, strong consideration is given to whether we can sustain an evidence-led prosecution. You know, previously that's been described as a victimless prosecution, but obviously that doesn't reflect the fact that there was always a victim in these cases. But this would be looking to consider whether we can, the circumstances will allow us to prosecute without the support of that victim. So they could, that all of these cases and the way our force is structured, other metropolitan forces have a similar structure in that the initial response by their uniform resources will do that primary investigation, gather the evidence, and then hand it over to specialist investigators within the public protection unit. So that just gives you a bit of an oversight of where we are in terms of structures, some of the changes in terms of uplift. This slide that's on the screen now, sorry, that's been a bit clunky around the beginning of the presentation, really doesn't, perhaps, you know, the graph itself doesn't dramatically show that uplift between 2017 to 2018, but the actual bars in those graphs show what we call P1 and P2 demand. So in simple terms, most forces describe this in slightly different ways, but P1 demand is the amount of incidents where we would deem it an absolute emergency, and as a minimum we'd try to get there within 15 minutes. So that's the little blue box. The red box underneath is what we call P2 demand, or other forces might call it urgent demand, where we aim to get them within an hour. So the circumstances of what's happened might be that we don't need to drive on blue lights to get there, but certainly we need to be engaging with that victim extremely quickly. That move from 2017 to 2018 is quite significant, so that I think the total amounts there's quite a significant gap between, there's over 1,000 extra P1s to deal with, and then I think if just looking at it, you know, crudely, around 6,000 additional P2s. The other years, 2019 and 2020, sustained that level and is projected to be similar for the end of this year. Maybe that slight, the fact that the graphs are slightly lower shows that you know, maybe the impact of COVID in terms of people being able to report. We know that the various lockdowns, you know, had distorted the way, the opportunity sometimes that victims had to report domestic abuse to the police, because they were effectively sort of trapped inside with their offender, which is a very disturbing and horrible thing to think about. But in terms of, it may have suppressed the demand to some extent in terms of what was reported to us. But that is a really significant uplift from that 2017. So looking at it strategically, that movement there placed a lot of pressure on the service, and arguably, you know, you can argue around when austerity and cuts to the police kind of finished, and when the uplift started. But I suppose the point to make, by 2017 to 2018, there was a lot of resourcing pressure in the police at the end of that austerity period. And even though we're really positive about the additional uplift and public money we've been given in terms of uplifting those resources, you know, it is also a distraction having to train officers from scratch again and get them up to speed. And we need experienced officers to do that tutoring and mentorship, which, you know, in some ways in the short term can be a distraction to over resourcing, which is very challenging. In terms of trying to meet the demand, one of the things that we've done and other forces have done is realign and introduce quite a complex shift pattern. The reason we've done that is another point to kind of bring out is that all those graphs are nice and neatly, 1 year at a time in a 24-hour period. That domestic abuse that's reported to us doesn't come through in a linear fashion. So it tends to come in on late shifts after 5 o'clock when people are together and awake at home. Domestic abuse gets reported all during the day, but less so perhaps in the early hours and the weekday. As a consequence of that, it means that a lot of that demand is pushed through a limited resourcing picture at key times. So we've had to reorganize ourselves so that our shift pattern has multiple shifts overlapping, particularly on lates, so that we're able to meet that general demand. That causes other operational problems in terms of our resilience in the early hours. If there is a one-off major incident, we have got less resources available to be able to deal with that between 0300 and 0700. And as I say, the department deals with all different range of different things. It also creates, logistical pressures in terms of vehicles, drivers, and being able to process that information. So that just gives an extent of the challenge, and that highlights some of the issues there. If you go on to the next slide, if that's okay. Don't know if my screen's frozen.
It's the domestic abuse recorded crimes since 2019.
Yeah, that's not on my screen. I don't know if anyone else can see that. Maybe it'll update. I've still got the year 1 P1 and P2 DA demand. I hope for that slide, when it does update, I'll soldier on. This shows recorded crime, and hopefully when you can see the graph, and you can kind of see the little one, I suppose, on the side there, hopefully. But this shows is a continuous and steady increase in the amount of crimes that we're recording. And even though I don't represent those secondary investigation, public protection units or criminal investigation departments that deal with all of that work, certainly it's the case that is under a tremendous amount of pressure at the moment. And really struggling to deal with that huge investigative work. Now, in terms of what's driven that uplift in recorded crime, as I said, it could be that it's changes, societal changes in attitude. People are more confident to report it. There's more confidence in the system, but it's undoubtedly also a function of national crime recording standards. So, a brief potted history of this is that up until 2002, really, different forces recorded different crimes in different ways, which made it very difficult strategically to compare performance, learn about best practice, or for the Home Office to properly scrutinise and manage how effective we were and how all that public money was being spent. So in 2002, national crime recording standards were brought in to attempt to bring some sort of consistency to that, to allow us to compare, learn, and share best practice. That system then was kind of become a point of inspection for HMIC, and by 2014, HMIC concluded sort of nationally that the consistency with which crime was recorded was poor, or inexcusably poor, I think was one of the terms that was used in one of the reports. So then we kind of move on to this system from there, where there's a lot of scrutiny put around this through inspections, and there's Home Office counting rules which have been introduced, which systemize and give a very strict set of rules about how crimes are recorded, and the police have very, very little or no discretion around how they apply those rules. One of the challenges around it is that recording crimes isn't a simple matter. If you take a simple but serious crime, say like a burglary, where someone breaks into your house, you would think it would be just as simple to record it, but then you'd have to have some rules around, when do you pass the threshold to record it as, say, a criminal damage or an attempted burglary, or a burglary, full burglary. If a burglar's traveling to an offence with equipment to break into a house, do we also record that as well? And then what sort of detail do we want to go into? The law will talk about buildings, but crime recording will, distinguish between dwellings and non-dwellings and all these sort of complications. So when you move into the field of domestic abuse, where the issues at hand involve relationships and violence and coercive control, those rules become even more complicated to apply consistently and effectively, and that's led to a case where we have a very sort of complicated set of bureaucracy that we have around it, and increasingly a dislocation between what we record and what we would ever be able to prosecute, or the CPS would pursue, or someone would be convicted for. And some of the complications around that are sort of compounded around where, you know, it might be in the victim's best interests really to prosecute one offence rather than an offence that's made out, say, of coercive control. So that could be coercive control could result in quite a prolonged, difficult trial where the victim would have to give evidence. We'd have to look into private information more deeply around their finances and their private lifestyle and how that was controlled, which would, you know, might be the right thing to do, but it might be and it might be very serious offences made out, but also within that presentation of that domestic abuse, there might also be issues of you know, there might be a straightforward, and I don't mean to belittle the seriousness of it, but straightforward but very serious assault that would be easier to prove because the victim's been injured, more likely to result in a guilty plea, so the victim wouldn't have to go through that. But we would end up during the process of that investigation having to record multiple crimes, and we're recording issues such as stalking, coercive control well below the threshold that we would ever be able to convict or prosecute someone, because the balance around that kind of process is very much based on that victim's presentation or someone who's associated with a victim, rather than the hard evidential facts that can be collected. And there's other you know examples where, for example, I was looking at a job recently where, you know, we attended a domestic where the husband had assaulted his wife while the mother-in-law was in the premises. I think the officers dealt with it really well. They took positive action. They arrested the offender, took a statement off the victim, also took a statement off the mother-in-law, who had hidden upstairs during this process. So we're in a good position in terms of trying to support that victim, break that cycle of violence and move it forward. And yet we got criticised for not recording a crime against the mother-in-law because she'd obviously apprehended violence by hiding in a part of the house, whereas actually our response to that incident, in my judgment, had been quite effective, because it's very unlikely we would ever be able to prosecute the offender for, you know, the fact that he'd made her apprehend physical violence, even though legally that would make out an assault. But it kind of just shows how that additional bureaucracy doesn't always drive forward, you know, with our limited resources, actually what is the best thing for the victim, and to try and help us, is that's that dislocation between the sort of criminal justice outcome and what we're recording and how we're going about that. If you can go on to the next slide, if it come through, that one has come through now. Okay, yeah, it seems to be working better. I've included this, not to talk about it for ages, but it shows the methods of reporting for domestic abuse to West Midlands. So on the left hand side, you've got the 101 number there and the 999. So I suppose it's kind of reflected in those original slides as well. But I think it does show, and there's the other ones there around, like we have a web chat system where we do pick up offences, people come into the police station on occasions, but it just shows predominantly that we do receive those emergency calls. And I think it shows how we're still, despite the points I've made there, people do contact us in a moment of crisis when they need our help. And that's just to share that, how that, you know, domestic abuse still comes into the police service in that traditional way, really, by people dialing 999 and or 101, really. So if we just go on to the next slide, again, this kind of illustrates that rise in crime levels, which is putting that you know, pressure on the system, and it seems to be increasing year on year. And I think that's because we're getting more and more rigorous around those crime recording standards, which is the point I wanted to bring out here. So even though they've kind of been in place since 2002, scrutiny on them is increasing and increasing. You know, sometimes there's a lack of because of that performance pressure that's put on. There's a lack of confidence that police might not be recording crimes properly because they're trying to make the figures look better. But you know, we can have a debate around that. But the rules are getting stricter and stricter and tighter, and then that's driving that forward. So so another area where this kind of plays out is particularly around harassment and stalking. You know, two really serious offences, but we're now required to record an harassment offence if there's any course of conduct made out in the presentation. So again, you might have a case where there's some breaches of restraining order, which are, you know, evidentially a more straightforward thing to deal with. If that happens on more than one occasion, as on the first presentation, we'd also in parallel record an harassment offence, but often it will still be the most sensible thing to just pursue the restraining order, you know, for the reasons I've kind of said before. So I mean, I think if you go on to the next slide, if you can get that one up, excellent. So within all that, then you've got this issue is compounded further by the definition of domestic abuse is quite broad, and rightly so, really, in terms of to capture the extent of the toxic behaviour that is involved within it. But it does mean then that captures a range of incidents under that umbrella that then hits our systematic approach in terms of crime recording, attendance, and that can, what I describe, kind of clutters the landscape in trying to find that hidden risk and deal with the limited resources we have against that wider spectrum of different events. So there's some examples on there which you can read, which are jobs that have come in and been classified correctly as domestic abuse. Now, I'm not saying that those jobs, those incidents, and you only get a snapshot, aren't important. It's a difficult, all of those incidents you could read and say, well, there could be something that lies underneath them. And if you attended and investigated it, there could be some really hidden and toxic issues there. Certainly on face value, it's less obvious what the criminal justice outcome, what would be around those events. So once you start, I suppose my kind of parting comment, because I'm getting to the end of my time as it's coming up to 10:30, is thinking around, okay, so once you combine all of those things, so that wider societal confidence, the breadth of that definition, that crime data integrity agenda that's driving forward, the way all of this is getting recorded under that umbrella of domestic abuse, and that issue of hidden crimes, it makes it difficult for the police to align their resources, which should always be limited to some extent, where the most harm is. And ultimately, the police service is that link into the criminal justice system, and to hold offenders and perpetrators of domestic abuse to account in the court system, which is always going to be part of the menu of options of how we respond to that. But it's whether we're best placed to be able to engage and deal with that breadth of volume to try and find those hidden crimes, because sometimes there aren't hidden crimes or hidden toxicity in some of the things that are reported. They are as stated, but they go into the system and have to be kind of unpicked with that limited resourcing picture, and ultimately kind of blunts arguably what we're trying to do from a police perspective. So I think there's a wider debate around how that those issues and incidents at the lower end of the risk spectrum, or ones that are caught up within that definition, are dealt with and assessed, whether that be by other agencies or the third sector, and then ultimately referred on to us. So it's more, I suppose, more raising the issue rather than the any concrete solutions, but it just I think highlights the demand and some of the demand, the challenges, and some of the drivers around that in terms of crime data integrity and demand. So I'll kind of stop there. I'm sorry, apologies to everyone that I am leaving the thing early. Unfortunately, I've got to attend a funeral for one of my officers, so otherwise I would have stayed for the whole thing. But if I hand back to you, Polly, in terms of, that's kind of the end of my bit.
Thank you so much, Richard. That was so insightful and really delves into some of the sort of complexities of policing when it comes to responding to domestic abuse. I just wanted to pick up on a couple of points that you made, just to expand on. You mentioned around the hidden crimes, the controlling coercive behaviour and stalking, and how it can be very difficult to gather that evidence towards prosecution. What more do you think that the police need in order to address those types of hidden crimes when dealing with domestic abuse?
I don't necessarily think it's hard for the police to gather it in one sense. It might be time consuming. I think the point I was trying to make is it can be quite more impactful on the victim, because a coercive control case might require us to go through all their bank records, and it might require us to go through phone records to show, to show the extent of the controlling behaviour and things like that, which is quite intrusive. And it's also, because of the elements of the offence are, in simple terms, say harder to prove, you're less likely to get a guilty plea. So if you don't have a guilty plea, then you're going to have a trial. And then when you have a trial, we're duty bound as independent investigators to investigate counter allegations, or to start investigating, aspects of the defendant's defence, which might involve intrusive inquiries into the victim, which is very contentious. So it's difficult to know how you would get around that. The way we try to get around it is we might look for simpler offences that are just as serious, because often within a coercive control presentation there will be serious assaults or criminal damage even, or stuff like that, that is easier to progress, not necessarily for us, but easier for the victim.
Absolutely, gosh. Absolutely. And you mentioned the challenges around the shift patterns, and how that impacts the policing response. But I wonder if you could just talk a little bit more around the crime data integrity drive and its impacts on domestic abuse volumes of cases.
Well, fundamentally, when we go to an offence, an incident of domestic abuse, the issue will be at hand and be quite normally, fairly intuitive. And then we will record, if we were doing it before crime data integrity drive and other recording standards, we would record the sort of primary offence. So if someone's been seriously assaulted, we would record that. There's nothing, and then we would investigate it, gather the evidence, and then the CPS would look at the most appropriate offence. And actually, what we've recorded it as has no bearing on what the CPS might charge or what ultimately the court might convict for. But within any description of an event that's criminal, that's describing a criminal, there's multiple different offences occur. So the burglary example, I kind of went down that because it makes it slightly less emotive, but you don't just commit burglary when you commit burglary. You're going equipped as an offence when you travel there. You damage the premises to get in, then you steal something which is part of the offence, but you might also, commit some other sort of damage with inside, or you might then get in a confrontation with someone in the house. So these are multiple offences layer up, but it's relevant really because that will gather all the evidence, will go to the CPS, and they will charge the most appropriate, proportionate offence. With domestic abuse, it's even more complicated. So we spend a lot of time recording and processing crimes that are don't make any difference in service to the victim in terms of what we prosecute or would ever take to court.
Okay, and just one last question, Richard. What do you think the role of other agencies or charities, organisations, partnership working, how impactful do you think that would be in safeguarding in line with policing responses to domestic abuse?
I think it would be where potentially it's identifying those within that volume where there is something as a police service, as a criminal justice agent, the ones that are most appropriate for us to engage with to support that victim, or whatever legal power is required, whether it's restraining orders or DVPNs and those sort of things. I think that's where it's some additional tier to be able to engage with some of those things, some of those jobs that maybe on an initial presentation are here at the lower end of the risk spectrum, but when anyone was to engage with them, they might be able to uncover some other things that do then need to be referred to the police. But at the moment, this one size fits all approach is what is causing us significant problems, and actually probably makes it, blunts our response generally.
Thank you again so much, Richard, for your time and your insight today. Appreciate that you do have to leave, but if anyone does have any questions, for Richard, please do pop them in the chat or email the organisers, and we'll make sure that we can feed them through to Richard for a response to you all. So once again, thank you so much, Richard. Really appreciate that input, really valuable stuff. Right, so now we're going to move on to our second speaker for the day, Daisy Carrillo. So Daisy, over to you.
Thank you, Polly. Good morning, everyone. My name is Daisy Carrillo. I am a domestic abuse survivor. I am originally from Venezuela, South America. I am a mature student. I went to college in 2016 and completed an access course to a higher education and GCSE in English. Later, I started my academic journey at UWL. In 2019, I completed an undergraduate degree in criminology with criminal justice. I managed to achieve the highest mark. I graduated with 78%. Currently, I am in the process of finishing a Master of Policing. And hopefully next year, I will start my PhD degree. However, in the beginning, life was not as bright. I grew up in a very dysfunctional home. I was terrified of my mom. When I was 8 years old, I was sexually molested by a cousin. I didn't tell anyone until I was 30 years old. My mom and my dad separated when I was 13. So living with only with my mom at home, it was very difficult for me. When I was 14, I met the father of my kid. And few months later, I left home. We were just a couple of kids still. And in the beginning, he was really nice with me, which was something new for me. By the age of 15, I was pregnant with my daughter. The first time he abused me, I was 4 months pregnant. I don't remember much why, but he was really angry with me. He was shouting and he pushed me and slapped me a couple of times. I left the house crying and I told my parents, but they were unable to help me. My mom said they must go back with him because it will be the first thing for my baby. So that's what I did. When I went back, he promised he would never do it again. When I was 7 months pregnant, we moved to his mom's house. And that was the beginning of a long life of abuse, not just by him, but also by his family. His parents didn't really like me. They always say that I was not good enough for their son. I was humiliated and treated like garbage by them all the time. His mom, in many different occasions, would spit on my face and say that I was worthless. She also slapped me a few times. I became pretty much their personal cleaner. Yesterday, when I was writing this, I was trying to think about how did I feel in that moment. And at the time, I think I only remember feeling so tired because his mom would always find many different ways to keep me busy cleaning her house. At the time, I didn't know any better. By the age of 20, we already have 3 kids. So I did everything that they asked me. So in my head, I was just very grateful for having a roof over my baby's head. I spent 18 years of my life with him. 18 years is a long time. There is no way that I can tell you today the full story, as there are so many different incidents of abuse. The only thing I can say is that in those 18 years, he beat me, pushed me, slapped me, humiliated me, and blamed me for everything, and really convinced me that the abuse, it was provoked by me. He also forced me to have sex with him because apparently it was my duty. According to him, I was not good for nothing, and that's why not even my own mother loved me. He was really good twisting everything concerning my family. Even when I wanted to leave everything on one side and start building my relationship with my family, especially with my mom, he made sure that never happened. He would call me stupid and thick on every possible opportunity. I remember one occasion when I asked him to buy me some earrings, and he said yes. And when I chose the earrings, he said to me, "Oh, they're a little bit big, is it?" And I said, "Yes, I like them." He looked at me and he told me, "You know, a woman's intelligence is measured by the size of her earrings. So one thing is that I know that you are stupid, Daisy, and that's fine by me. But if you start wearing big earrings, everybody is gonna know that you're stupid, and that will make me look bad." I would like to highlight that it took me a long time to start wearing earrings, because when you are told all the time that you are stupid and thick, you start to believe it. He was always angry with me, apparently because I was not a good mom, or I was not a good wife, or because I said something that he didn't like. Him. Sometimes, especially when people was around, he would look at me and shake his head just to let me know that there's something that upset him. Therefore, I was in trouble. So the abuse got to that level when he didn't even have to say anything. He will look at me and shake his head, or maybe do a deep sound, just to show to me, how angry he was. He was also also very unfaithful. And sometimes he would disappear for 1 or 2 weeks without telling anyone where he was. His mom would say that it was my fault because I didn't know how to make him happy. She always blamed me for her son's. She always blamed me for her son's misbehavior. Being blamed for everything leaves you in this feeling of helplessness, guilt. You always feeling guilty, even if for other people's action. You always feel that it's your fault, and you get to this stage of loneliness. They always knew I have nowhere to go, so they took advantage of that. In every single argument, he made sure to say to me that if I leave him, he would take my kids away. So I just accepted that was my life. However, things started changing when his brother died in a car accident. His mom was heartbroken, so they decided that it was the best for his mom to move back to the UK, as she's English. They wanted her to be close to her family. A year later, he came here as well to prepare everything to move all of us here. I stayed in Venezuela with my kids for a little bit, and for the first time, I was free, and it was so nice, having them and listen to them criticizing everything about me. I started working in the morgue with my dad, and I became a morgue technician. So at the time, it was a little bit of happiness there. However, in 2003, I was pretty much forced to come to the UK, and later I brought my kids too. Moving to the UK was hard because I didn't speak any English, so I felt very disconnected from everything and everyone. I never went to college to learn English. I learned English working. Moving to the UK changed the patterns of abuse. He became more cautious, especially because he didn't want the neighbors to hear anything. If I started to cry, he would ask me to put a pillow on my face, or he would actually close push my lips so that just to make me quiet. He was always in control of everything, especially the money. We were always struggling because he never wanted to apply for any social support. He said that we didn't need help. There is a contradiction there because we depend a lot on his mom's help. And because I was the only one working, pretty much he forced me to get payday loans and other type of loans. Things began to change when I started communicating better in English, because people will ask me questions about the bruises and why I always look like I've been crying a lot. For me, this was different because never before, no one asked me questions about his behavior. So I started talking about it. And for me, it becomes like a way to drain all the stress I was having at home. Also, I have few friends. I made few friends. And they all the time would say to me that what he was doing not right. It was not right. So I had other friend that she said to me many occasions, Daisy, you are not Venezuela no more. If a man do this that to me, I will call the police. And I remember thinking, wow, can I call the police? So being able to talk about it and have the people around me, I started to become a little bit more braver every day. But he would say to me still that if I leave him or I do whatever, or I don't do whatever he wants me to do, he will get me deported. Even after I was granted indefinite to remain, he convinced me that I can ever divorce him or leave him because I will get deported. He was cute, assuring that if I tell anyone, nobody would believe me because he was British and I was not. He said that the law would favor him, and I truly, really believe him. I remember sometimes thinking, how can I make people to see him for what he really is? Because he was really, really good pretending and showing that he was an excellent husband, a very good father to my kids. He was charming, very friendly with everyone. People used to tell me how lucky I was to be with him. I never say anything. The only thing in my mind was, Daisy, you need to smile and say yes. Because if he get upset, in the way back home, he's going to start driving very fast and he's going to begin making threats about he's going to kill all of us. It took me a long time to build my strength, to ask him to move out. And when I finally did, he destroyed my passport. Well, our passport, including my children's one. It was awful. It was an escapable nightmare because as a migrant woman, migrant woman in this country with no passport, it's nothing. So I tried to get the new passport to get my visa re-stamped. It was so difficult because as I mentioned before, I'm from Venezuela, and due to the political problems there, it was very difficult to get passport replacement. It took me over a year to actually get the passport back. Even when I knew that I have the indefinite leave to remain, and I told him that he needed to meet, that I know I have rights and I know he could not do anything anymore to me. I told him to leave the house, but he refused to actually leave the house. A friend told me to call the police because they will help me. So I went to the police and I asked them for help. At the time, they said that it was a private matter and they cannot force him to leave his house because the tenancy agreement was in both names. So I packed all our things, my kids and my things, and I told him that if he doesn't leave, I will be the one leaving. I didn't know where because I didn't have nowhere to go, but I just packed everything. For a few months, we lived with everything in boxes. I think at some point he realized that he lost his power over me because when he tried to continue the physical abuse, I didn't cry anymore and I started to defend myself. Eventually, he moved out. I remember that day, me and my kids, they were so happy. We cleaned the house, we unpacked everything, and I remember we watched a film and ordered pizza. But the abuse didn't finish there. He would come to the house even uninvited, and he would follow me places. It was quite scary because I didn't know what he would do to me. And then the problem then was that he didn't want to support the kids anymore. It was really hard because it was like he was punishing me for leaving him. I remember I told my boss at the time, and she said to me, Daisy, why you don't apply for child tax credit and working tax credit as you are entitled to? And I was like, what? Am I entitled to apply for anything or for help? So I managed to make the application. She helped me. And I remember after that, they called me and they say that they could not back pay all those years that I didn't claim. So they said that we only backdate my payment for, I think was for 1 or 2 years only. So at the time, I didn't understand much about the benefit system. So I said, okay. A month later, they put nearly £4,000 in my account. I was so scared because I called them many times and I said to them, you made a mistake. You put some money in my account that is not for me. So I don't want no trouble with this money. So it took me a few days and many phone calls to tax credit to understand that the money was to help me with my kids. Some people may think that immigrants come here to abuse the benefit system. And what I can say based on my own experience is that for many years, I didn't even know there was a benefit system. So I never had the intention to abuse it. There is so much that I didn't know, including my legal rights, and the fact that after being granted indefinite to remain, I could divorce him. So when I found out that, then that's what I did. One day he came to the house and asked me to let him borrow some money because he was going back to Venezuela for some holidays. And I said no. And a week later, he left the UK and never came back. My kids never saw him again. We never saw him. So in some certain point, I was kind of relieved, but I did feel, bad for my kids. He left me with loans, debts, and they pretty much forced me to get, but to be honest, for me, I was finally free. Since then, we have been, me and my kids have been trying to recover from the trauma of living with him. Now I understand that staying with him was not the best for my kids. When surviving domestic abuse, there are many different emotions involved. And it's so hard because sometimes you feel like there is no escape. And you are inside this dark, deep hole that is impossible to climb out. But I want to reassure those women experiencing domestic abuse that yes, there is possible, there is a way out. The first step is to recognize that you don't deserve to be treated like that. Nobody does. I think it is important to learn that we cannot control how other people behave. Stop thinking that if you stay, they are going to change their behavior. They never do. And more importantly, don't blame yourself as you are not responsible for the abuse. Leaving that criminal that abused me for 18 years, I began to learn, after leaving him, I began to learn how to love myself. However, it was very difficult for me to get another job apart from cleaning. I was tired of cleaning. So I enrolled myself in college and I started a new journey. During my undergraduate degree, I began to evaluate domestic abuse from a criminological perspective, and I started evaluating the general responses to gender-based crimes. Nowadays, I dedicate my time to writing and researching about crimes that affect women disproportionately. I'm also a member of the Latin American Association, where I deliver training to my Latino sisters. I also work for Hillington Women's Center. I found my voice. Some people will say that I got a strong opinion about everything. Am I right? But I refuse to be silent again. Being at university has been the best opportunity of my life because I had the opportunity to learn from a lot of people. I had amazing mentors during my undergraduate degree. They always believed in me, including Dr. Daniel Arger and Dr. William Les. They always saw my potential and they knew how to motivate me to do better. That's why I am planning to carry on educating myself and get my PhD degree. This is the first time I share my story. And I have done it because I want other survivors to know that yes, it is possible. Don't let anyone to tell you what you are capable to do. Do you and find your own voice. Thank you, everyone.
Daisy, thank you so much. Thank you for sharing. We really do, feel that your journey has led itself to really be in a positive place now. And I'm delighted that you're doing your PhD. There's a lot of comments in the chat for you there, Daisy. Just truly remarkable that you shared this story with us today in order for us to better understand not just domestic abuse and all the different nuances, but also the migrant woman's journey, which quite often gets forgotten, if you like, or hidden away from the mainstream. And yet it is a very prevalent area that we know policing and other agencies need to do more around. So Daisy, just once again, thank you so much for sharing. We really do appreciate it. And if anyone has any questions, please do use the chat. Right, we are going to move on, and our next speaker is Christine Gagnon. Sorry, I apologise. Is Elizabeth Jimenez Yanez? I apologise if I've not said that right. Elizabeth, thank you so much for joining us today. And to follow on from what Daisy's just shared with us, please do let's start your presentation from the Latin American Women's Service.
Right service.
Right. Thank you. Sorry. So over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Polly. I'll do my try to share my screen, so hopefully it works. Just bear with me a second, and I think there it is. Can you see it? I hope you can.
Yeah, we can see it. Great.
Okay, perfect. So thank you very much for the invitation. I'm delighted to be here. First of all, thank you very much, Daisy, for sharing your story. It's really powerful to hear your experience and how you have overcome all these challenges. Thank you for that. Also, I think I'm really grateful for being here because in light of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, it's really important to speak about domestic abuse. As Polly mentioned, my name is Elizabeth Jimenez Yanez. I am the Policy and Communications Coordinator on Violence Against Women and Girls at the Latin American Women's Rights Service. Today, I will be presenting on the intersection of domestic abuse and immigration status with a particular focus on data sharing victims data sharing between the police and immigration enforcement. So I think my presentation will complement really well what Daisy told us as part of her experience. So, sorry, I went to the wrong one. There it is. Just to start, LORS, we are a feminist and a human rights organization led by and for Latin American migrant women. We have worked over 38 years supporting and advocating for the rights of Latin American and other migrant women living in the UK. At the heart of our work, we have the conviction that all survivors, regardless of their immigration status, must have the right to live a life free from violence and to be protected from abuse. Since 2017, we have been leading the Step Up Migrant Women campaign. This is a campaign that seeks for the establishment of safe reporting mechanisms so victims and survivors of violence against women and girls can report abuse safely without facing any negative immigration consequences. At the moment, the campaign is supported by over 50 organizations from different sectors, human rights organizations, women's organizations, migrant organizations. We campaign to influence key decision makers. An example of our work, we were pretty active in the progress of the Domestic Abuse Act to ensure migrant women were protected from abuse. Sadly, unfortunately, the amendments we proposed to the bill were not taken on board. And that's why we believe the Domestic Abuse Act is not protecting migrant domestic abuse victims. Other of the goals of the campaign is to center the voices of migrant survivors and organizations supporting them. In terms of the intersection of domestic abuse, gender-based abuse, and immigration status, we know that domestic abuse and other forms of gender-based violence disproportionately affect migrant women. And this is because migrant women are subjected to multiple and overlapping barriers to protection. What we know is that migrant women often experience abuse from multiple perpetrators that can be extended members of family or their communities. As Daisy told us, migrant women experience language barriers. But what it's important to say around language barriers is that these language barriers are aggravated by the lack of suitable interpreter provision, and also are compounded by abusers preventing migrant women from accessing English classes. We know that as part of the experiences of abuse that people have, isolation is an important element. In the experience of migrant women, this is worse because migrant women might not have any support networks in the UK when migrating to the UK. And also as part of this isolation, they might not be aware of the rights in the country and the fact that there are organizations that can support them. Migrant women have a limited understanding of the UK system, including a limited understanding of the complexity of the immigration system in the UK. This lack of understanding is often exploited by perpetrators who often have more access to information. Daisy portrayed this really well when she spoke on how her perpetrator convinced her that she didn't have rights despite having indefinite leave to remain. This is a really good example of this situation. Also, there's the existence of the no recourse to public funds rule that prevents migrant women from accessing state support. Migrant women with certain immigration status, especially those, I'm really sorry about that, especially those with insecure immigration status, that means people who don't have settled status. The no recourse to public funds impacts the experience of abuse of migrant women in two main areas. The first one is that women are prevented from accessing refuge accommodation as they don't have access to public funds. And also, it increases the financial dependency on perpetrators, which jeopardizes the possibilities of escaping abuse. Something that it's really important to mention when we speak about barriers is to say that barriers experienced by migrant women are often structural. We also know that, for instance, in comparison to white British women or women with settled status, women with insecure immigration status endure longer periods of abuse. As part of an investigation we did in 2019, a frontline worker had an informal account of around 35 incidents of abuse experienced by migrant women before reporting to the police. We also know there's a systemic exclusion from the criminal justice system. Some research has shown that there are less criminal investigations and less criminal charges in cases involving migrant women. What we know as an organization doing frontline work, but also doing campaigning work, is that all these barriers I have spoken about are worsened by immigration policy, as it increases the way that immigration status plays as a risk factor to experiencing gender-based violence. Let me share with you the case of Esperanza, who after being denied support went back to her perpetrator. I'm gonna read her testimony. When the COVID-19 pandemic started and we went into lockdown, the abuse grew worse. It wasn't easy to contain him as he was spending all day at home. He was shouting at me, humiliating me, and throwing, sorry, I think someone had their microphone on, and throwing stuff at me nonstop. He threatened with reporting me to immigration, getting me deported. It was impossible to continue there, and as I feared for my child's safety, I decided to leave. When I left, I faced many challenges because of my immigration status. I can access public funds. That meant that accessing a refuge bed was not an option for me. I lived every day with the constant fear of becoming destitute and homeless as I was living with the bare minimum. As Esperanza case shows, women's status exacerbates the abuse they face as it prevents them from accessing support and in many cases justice. This case is also relevant because, as we all know, domestic abuse surged in light of lockdowns produced by the COVID-19 pandemic. There has been important work developed in understanding how immigration status plays a role in shaping the experience of BOC that migrant women experience. Recently, a report launched by the Domestic Abuse Commissioner introduced the concept or highlighted the concept of immigration abuse. At the front line, we see many of the forms that perpetrators use the status of women to coerce and control them. We see how migrant women are lied about their immigration status, how they are lied about immigration applications, and how in many cases women end up losing their status and becoming undocumented as part of the abuse. Perpetrators threaten women with report them with immigration authorities to have them removed from the country and to be separated from their children in order to trap them in these abusive relationships. These forms of abuse are recognized both in the controlling or coercive behavior statutory guidance and the new statutory guidance of the Domestic Abuse Act. As part of our advocacy work in 2019 and focused on the way that perpetrators use immigration status to threat women with deportation, we launched the Right to be Believed report. This report accounts the experiences of over 60 women with insecure immigration status experiencing BOC. Some of the key findings of what prevents women from reporting abuse to the police are: we found out that almost 6 in 10 women had received threats of deportation from abusers. More than half of the women feared that they would not be believed by the police because of their immigration status. More than half of these women felt that the police and the Home Office would support the perpetrator over them. And something that it's really important to mention in here, especially because we'll speak about best practice, is that almost half of the women found that women's organizations were the most important place to report experiences of gender-based violence. The issue of migrant victims' information being shared between the police and the Home Office, and the fear that this inflicts on women has been a concern for many years for the women and the migrant women sector. For that reason, in 2018, Southall Black Sisters and Liberty filed the first ever super complaint in the UK. As you might be aware, a super complaint is a mechanism to raise concerns on behalf of the public about patterns or trends in policing that are or appear to be significantly harming the interests of the public. This first super complaint was about the treatment of victims of crime and witnesses with insecure immigration status, not only victims of domestic abuse, but victims in crime in general. And it focused on how information about them is passed to the Home Office for immigration enforcement. After 2 years of assessments led by Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Constabulary and senior representatives from both the Independent Office for Police Conduct and the College for Policing, the investigation upheld what migrant and migrant women sector has been saying for years. And this is really important. First of all, the report found out that police data sharing with immigration enforcement hampers crime reporting. Victims are deterred from reporting due to the fear of immigration enforcement. This results from the threats they receive from perpetrators, and this is a trend we often see with victims of domestic abuse with insecure immigration status. The report also showed that significant harm is being caused to the public interest as crimes are not reported and therefore not investigated. This situation prevents victims from accessing justice, but also allows perpetrators to abuse with impunity. The report also found that there is an inconsistent response across police forces about how to support victims with insecure immigration status. It's really important because this report concludes that the current situation is not serving the interests of victims of crime. There were a set of recommendations coming from this report. The first recommendation was that the police had to immediately stop sharing the data of victims of domestic abuse with immigration enforcement. The report was very clear that sharing information with immigration enforcement does not constitute safeguarding in the cases of victims of domestic abuse. Unfortunately, up until now, this recommendation has not been enforced, and we are aware data is still being shared. The three independent bodies also recommended a review of law and policy in this specific area. They said that the effect of this review should be to establish safe reporting mechanisms for all migrant victims and witnesses, including those with insecure immigration status, so they can access police service. This report has been built around some workshops we had as organizations from the third sector trying to influence this, and the final report is going to be laid before Parliament before the end of the year. So we are waiting for this report. Also, another recommendation that it's really important is that there's a need of consistent policy and protocols to be developed in consultation with the specialist agencies who understand the barriers to reporting faced by migrant victims of crime. Moving on, what is best practice when encountering victims with insecure immigration status? The first thing is to believe victims and survivors regardless of their legal status. As I already mentioned, these victims are told by perpetrators that no one is going to believe them because of their insecure immigration status. Victims need to be treated as victims first and foremost, irrespective of their legal status. It's important not to center interventions on victims or survivors' immigration status. As shown by the super complaint information sharing, schemes between the police and the Home Office are harming victims of domestic abuse. Our experience shows that information sharing not only is harming victims, but it's undermining the trust in the police. And it's allowing perpetrators to remain unpunished. And as you know, in the last months, there has been a lot of conversations on how we increase trust in the police, especially the trust of victims of violence against women and girls. So there needs to be a clear separation between safeguarding and any form of immigration control or immigration enforcement. Something really important is to create referral pathways with the specialists by and for Black and minoritized organizations supporting migrant women. Our organizations are tailored to provide specialists, culturally and linguistically competent wraparound support for these women, including something really important, support for these women to regularize their immigration status. I want to close my presentation with an audio piece that was produced by an artist called Gaël Lecornet. This audio piece, it's inspired on the testimonies of women who participated in our report, The Right to Be Believed. There's a content warning because the audio piece the extract of the audio piece you'll hear has descriptions of domestic abuse. So if you need to take a break and you don't want to listen to the audio, please do so. Karen is gonna help me to share this because I cannot share my audio. So just let me stop presenting so Karen can comment. Karen, I think you can do it now. Yep, okay.
I'm not allowed to have friends, no female friends, because he used to say they will change you. He used to say, I'm your friend. So when he gets home from work, he takes me out. He restricted contact with my family. Don't call them always, don't speak to them always, and this and that. And he'd get angry at me if in front of him I was talking to my sister on WhatsApp. He was like, no. When your husband is here, you have to be with him and talk to him. One day I called this women's organization. They put me in a refuge for me and my baby. Because of my complicated status, it was a different B&B every day. It was hard because at the B&B, you had to leave the property at 9:00 a.m. And one day this lady said, you have to leave. I said, wait a minute, they are going to call me to tell me where to go. She said, if you stay, you have to pay for another night. But I didn't have any money. I had nothing. And she threw me like this on the streets with my baby. Just like this, on the streets. It was raining. Calm down. Don't worry. Calme-toi, mon petit. Excuse me, I'm looking for... Mister, do you know where I can... Please, I am on the streets with my baby and I would like to have... Oh, Miss, hello. I hope you're having a nice day. Please, I just need a phone where I can... Sorry, I just need just a few coins so I can make a phone call. Sorry, I'm not sure the name of this street. Excuse me, is there any way you could point me towards the right direction? Sorry, do you mind if I just stay here for a few minutes while the rain passes? Just a couple of minutes, I'm sure it won't be long. Just one phone call. I'll be very quick.
Thank you, Karen. So I'm just gonna share my last slide. So as Polly mentioned, sadly I have to leave, but I'm happy to be in contact with anyone who might have a question. These are my contact details. Thank you very much, and it's always really important for us to speak about the experiences of migrant women that, as Polly mentioned, are often overlooked and not considered when putting together strategies to protect victims and survivors of gender-based abuse. Thank you very much.
Elizabeth, thank you so much for that presentation and audio. Really do appreciate you putting the time in today. And if anyone's got any questions, please do either use the chat, and we'll make sure that we pass them over to you, Elizabeth, as well. So thank you once again. Fantastic presentation as always. Best, thank you. Moving on to our next speaker is Christine Gagnon, who is going to explore a bit more about what we can do around domestic abuse. Christine, over to you. I should mention Christine's joining us from Canada today, so it's about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. So we really do appreciate the time that you've put in for this conference. Over to you again, Christine.
Thank you so much, Polly. It's a pleasure for me to be here. And believe me, my coffee is very good this morning. So I'm really happy to be with you. Thank you for the invitation, Polly. It's very, very a nice event. It's well organized, and all the presentation are so powerful. Thank you so much. So good morning, everyone. So I'm here from Canada. I have my colleague, one of my team is with us also, Hussan Ali, who is from Switzerland, but he is in London presently, so it's a good thing. So so I hope I can bring new information to you today. I will talk about using behavioral cues to be able to see coming an act of violence and to react regarding this. So it's going to be really regarding behavioral analysis. So so let's jump into it. I will share my screen right away. Here we go. So hopefully you can see my screen. Just a minute, right here. Here we go. So let's jump into it. So yes, my name is Christine Gagnon. So I'm an analyst, a profiler analyst. I'm working in the field of behavioral analysis since 18 years now, and I'm also an expert in linguistic semantics. And I'm working in the field of security since 18 years, not only in the field of security, but a lot of it. So it's one of my experiences. I also developed the Scan Cell certification. It's a program that helps to analyze threat in crowd. So I teach police officers, militaries to detect threat in the crowd. I have a team of profilers. The profilers are a psychologist, a mediator, a lawyer. I have a security professional specialist. I have a cyber investigator and a doctor. So I receive videos, or I have to be in the field, so into a situation and analyze what is going on and make a report regarding this event or the investigation interview. So this is it. Let's go into the presentation. So there is great solutions and services to help victims, but not that much are really preventive. And when I'm talking about preventive, I'm talking before the act of violence. So it's what I'm going to talk about today. So I create the Scan Cell program, as I told you, and this program is really to detect threat in a crowd. So I took a few of the modules and create a program for victims to be able to detect an act of violence. So it's really a new program that is now in Canada. It's going to be in France in a few months. Also, I'm with the government of France also. So it's really a good program to help victims to see coming an act of violence. So my team and I designed this new tool with information that are already into behavioral sciences. Okay, CellScan and this training is really created with all those information. But what is behavioral sciences? It's a group of disciplines. It's a cluster of disciplines all together. We can understand the interaction between people. Okay, this is the basic of the behavioral sciences. So it's a cluster of disciplines that helps us to understand the interaction between organisms or, of course, people. So this is the basic of it. What is predictive profiling? Predictive profiling is a threat assessment method that predicts and categorizes threat information to be able to predict the event. And what is the behavioral analysis detection? It's a detection protocol that helps us to understand an individual, a group, or an event, a situation, and understand attitudes, behavioral, and activities. So I put all those things all together to create programs that helps victims. So along well, it's been 18 years now that I'm in this field of security. I had many training regarding behavioral analysis. Each training I took over the years was always with the same goal to be a good behavioral analyst. So I took all those classes, and the program is based on and designed with all those information. What is Cancel? I have to explain you what is Cancel before going into the program, because it's important to understand where it comes from. So this Cancel program, it's a surveillance detection and behavioral analysis training that help to detect suspicious indicators and people in a crowd. So I call my scan the highly trained eyes agent. So there is like 4 levels. I teach predictive profiling to them. I teach how to analyze physical analysis, hypotonicity of the body, a type of bodies, how the person can react when someone is alone, what are they thinking, where are they looking at. So each of information regarding hidden weapons, kamikaze, terrorisms, so all of this, the way someone is walking, the direction and everything. So everything is into it. So we took modules on it, and we create this syllabus, this program that help victims. Of course, we're not talking about kamikaze and terrorism. We are talking about seeing an act of violence coming. It's really important. So we have to detect all the escalating of the behavior of the person. It's not only emotions, okay? Emotions are good. We are able to see fear, aggressiveness, and everything. It's not about this. It's about behavior, attitudes. It's much more only. It's much more than emotions. Emotions, we can see it, but I'm talking about movement that are coming and will help you to see that something is going on. And there is a circle of attack that it's been already teach to police officers and militaries. So I put this information into this program to explain to the victim, you can see it coming. You see right here, he's checking everything that you're doing. He's asking you questions. He's saying this word, because you have to understand that a really good training in behavioral analysis, it's not only nonverbal. It's a triangulation of three things: words, tone of voice, and of course, gestures. With all those three, you can be able to understand what is going on, but you have to put all together. Only one thing is not enough. You have to add all those things, okay? So the syllabus, in the syllabus, we see all those information and even mental issues. So it's really important to talk about the reality of it, to see coming the aggressiveness, because it can start by someone who is only annoyed. Let's say that you're saying something to me and I'm annoyed. Yeah, you will see it because I'm going to start to clean the table a little bit. I will close my mouth a little bit. I will look away and turn a little bit my eyes. And then I will say to you things, negative words. And then it's going to go toward the angry, being angry. We can see it with the shoulder, hypotonicity of the shoulder. We can see it with the facial expression. We can see it with the fist. We can see it with a lot of indicators. And then it goes toward aggressiveness. So you have manipulation, and then being annoyed, and then being angry, and then aggressiveness. You have to act before. But it's way before this. You have to see coming the manipulation with the words. So it's regarding all of this, okay? So I was listening a video on YouTube 4 years ago, I guess, and I heard this information that caught my attention. This former agent, military agent, was saying that you just need to be 70% sure before you act. Waiting 5 to 10% longer can be a matter of life or death. This is the same thing for a victim. She don't have to be sure at 100%, just a little bit. And they got their feeling, their gut feeling. And you know what? The gut feeling is not abstract. It comes from experiences. So I'm going to help them to feel it and to say, okay, there is something here. So I will be able to ask a question. I will be able to hear what he's saying, check the words, and then verify gestures that are going with this and the tone of voice. Okay, there is something happening. I will do something else. I will go, I will do, whatever I have to do. So it gives behavioral analysis helps you to prevent. You see the gesture coming. Well, the nonverbal is pre-verbal. The body received the information, we can see the movement, and then it goes from the tronc cérébral, I'm sorry, I don't know the name in English, the tronc cérébral, it goes to the two hemispheres, and then you say something, but the body already reacts. It's why it's so interesting. So with this program, it's not only a program for victims, it's also a program for young people, teenagers, victims of proxenetism. It's important for them to see it coming also. And again, it's not only gestures, it's behavioral. Behavior is also words and tone of voice. Social workers, those people can help victims because we train social workers, they can train the victims also, okay? So they can help us, but I'm going to train them also to how to question. It's the same thing with family and friends. When they see that there is a problem with a friend, with a sister, with a mother or something, they can open the communication and help them to see the reality. But you have to be able to ask good questions. You don't go into an interview or talking to someone only like this. You have to have a plan, a good question strategy plan of questioning to help to open the communication. Because if you ask this question first, you will close the communication and it's going to be too bad. So how to question. Police officers is the same thing. They are coming into a house. They've been called and they are in a house. The woman don't want to to put charges, you know, to say that she's been injured or something. So how to open the communication, how to ask a question. They have not a lot of time to see if it's going good or not. They have all their tools already, but they have to know how to question. And it's a strategy to see what is the reaction of, because when you ask a question, do you know what? When you ask a question, the other person is moving, and then you have to see the other one, because when you are asking a question to someone, the other one is reacting. So you have to, each time you ask a question, there is a reaction, and when you see a reaction and you know the gestures, of course, you can ask another question. It's to multiply the questions. It's only this. So it's important how to question. Let me give you an example of a module. It's regarding the gaze. The gaze is so important. Where, why, and when it gives you those information, okay? There is 11 types of gaze. So we have diachronic, socioaffective, looking away, blind gaze, geospatial, 1,000-yard stare, and etc., etc. Those information are really important, because if someone, let's say that an aggressive person is alone and thinking and building his strategy, you have to watch him, because he's gonna, if you are watching him while he's alone thinking about his strategy, you can see indicators. Not everything, of course. It's a tool. It's a tool to see it coming. So the gaze is really important. I'm teaching to victims, and sometimes I told them, okay, where did he look when he said this thing? And she said, you know what? He checked the knife that was on the table. Yeah, well, now she knows it because she's outside the situation. But if she's trained to do it, she will be able to see it. So you just have to be trained, of course. And you know, nonverbal communication, behavioral, tone of voice, words, we use it from time to time. It's millions of years that we're using it, but we don't taking it in consideration. So my job is just to help you to be, and help the victims to be more confident, to feel it and to analyze and then to act. Those are 3 elements, and that's it. So our preventive movements aims to train victims and people at risk, of course, deal with an indisputable list of indicators. So we are making a list of indicators. We are practicing a lot. We have a lot of videos, of course. Those are graphic videos, but it's helping the victims to understand that it's not good. We can see it coming, and those are bad words, and etc., etc. Restore the confidence to help them to act faster, because when we're confident, we can act faster, help the cycle of support right at the beginning. We'll talk about it. Okay, this slide is really important for me because it's really fantastic to help victims, but there is a challenge in this situation, and it's really strange, my challenge. My challenge is to help victims to see the act of violence coming so they can run away before. But the person, the aggressive person, staying there, and he didn't touch anyone, so this person stay there and he's not charged of anything because nothing happened. So there is a little gap right here. There is a little, you know, problem right here that we have to solve. So we create here in Canada, and we will do it in France also, a committee of professionals that can help to build a psycho-legal verbatim admissible in court. And so in this committee, we have a lawyer, a police officer, so someone who knows the law in the field. We have a social worker, we have a victim, we have someone like me as a behavioral analyst, linguistic semantic, of course. So all those people are working to take the verbatim of a victim saying, he said this, he did that to me, and blah, 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 put it in the words of maybe psychologist, and put it in a word of a lawyer, and put it in court to be admissible. So we have to work on it. So there is this struggle, part, but I think we can do something. And you know what? If we can go through this, it means that all the timeline, all the people that are helping victims will have the same verbatim. Could be really great, because we will know what we're talking about. And you know what? The victim will say, okay, they believe me, they knows it, they understand it, they heard this word before, he did this and he did this. So the victim will gain in confidence, because she will talk the same language with the others. So it's really important. So the call for a concerted action is required to address the current emergency. Well, what I'm talking about here, it's the timeline is simple. It's always the same thing. Well, not always, but it's mostly the time the same thing. So the victim has been injured. The victim called the police, 911 here in Canada. So the police using their good tools to help, to go there and to analyze the situation. The victim goes to an organism to get help. So the social workers are using their good tools to help this victim. And everything goes to the lawyer, so the lawyer can have a good case to go on a trial. And then let's say the aggressor goes to jail, and then the probator officer verify if we can put him outside, let it go home without any problem or not. Okay, so this is the timeline. Today, I'm adding something else. I'm adding this information right here. I think that it could be really great to give a tool to the one who is on the battlefield, who is the first one who receive a punch. Let's say it's the one who is in the battlefield. We never let the military goes on the front line without being trained. It's the same thing here. We should train the victims. They will help us to help them. This is one of the situation. I think it could be good. Okay, so we have to train the victims. We have to give another tool, a supplementary tool, a little tool, not a big one, a little tool to the police officer, how to question in this situation. Tools, again, another little tool, supplementary tool to the social worker, to the lawyer, and to the probation officers to see, okay, he's saying this, I'm gonna ask this question, and I see that, I'm not sure right here. So to help everyone, okay, to have the same training. So one possibility consists to increase the autonomy of the victims. Because of the power and control cycle, the cycle of violence, the autonomy of the victims is low. So we have to increase it by giving them, a training or something, a tool, let's say a tool, okay? So just to finish, by being equipped at the cutting edge of the latest research and discovery in the analysis of human behavior, it is possible for us to make a difference with victims and people at risk. What I'm saying here is that we are full open of new technology. This is fantastic new technology. We loved it. Well, you know what? There is new discovery in behavioral analysis, and we don't follow the game. So we have to be at the latest discovery in behavioral analysis. And, you have to understand that you need the triangulation again, not only nonverbal, it's words, tone of voice, attitude, gestures, nonverbal. All together, you can create a good question and understand what is going on in front of you. And it's really, really important, okay? So that's it. So over to you, Polly.
Thank you so much, Christine. What a fascinating presentation. I'm sure there'll be lots of questions for the panel discussion as well. Thank you so much. Really do appreciate that. Next, we have a video from one of our presenters who wasn't able to join us today, from Graham Golden. Karen, I wonder if you could possibly share that video. Thank you. No audio.
My name is Graham Golden, and first of all, I'm sorry that I'm not able to be with you live, so to speak, this morning. But I've been asked to pull together a 20 or so minute conversation on a subject that I feel is really, really important. And first of all, thank you for signing up to come along to this important conference. You know, domestic abuse is a badge of shame for our country, and it's something that not only as professionals we need to engage with, but I think as society, and that's part of the conversation that I'm going to have with you today. How do we get society involved? How do we build trust as a policing organisation? But how do we engage society in the prevention of violence, domestic abuse? I'm a former police officer. I spent 30 years in policing. I retired 4 years ago from Police Scotland. And one thing I learned was about the power of community. Prevention of any issue starts in the community. And my conversation today is going to start to bring that untapped resource, so to speak, into the conversation. So let me just share my screen with you. I've got some slides that I want to use to keep the conversation going today. So this title, Building Supportive Communities to Prevent Domestic Abuse. As I said, prevention starts in the community. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is about how do we do that? My passion in my work just now is engaging the bystander, the people around the victim or around the harm doer, the perpetrator. Imagine a society where people knew what to look for, where people knew what to do, what to say, do it safely and responsibly, and keeping themselves safe and keeping victims safe. But we have a great potential to bring that resource into the conversation. As I said, prevention starts in the community. What I do now, since leaving policing, I work in a number of different settings, in communities, in towns, in villages, and talking about things like domestic abuse or sexual violence, and all through this lens of the bystander. I work in workplaces, talking about harassment, talking about bullying. I work in sports teams, schools, universities, all using this bystander approach. My brand, Cultivating Minds UK, I just love creating conversations. And see, when you start to have these conversations, people actually, want to talk about it. And there's lots going on in the media just now around domestic abuse and other forms of men's violence against women. And it's a myth that people don't want to talk about this stuff. And men want to talk about that. I'm going to talk about men as we go through this session today. And I really believe that we can engage people in our communities. We can make a real difference. So my focus is on cultivating that discussion, that important discussion in our communities. My aims today, I've been asked to look at a number of subjects. What are the risks in relation to domestic abuse? What can we do? And what can we do as a policing organisation to build trust? I'm a retired police officer, but I'm feeling it just now for policing. And I think something that we need to be brave. We need to accept some of the faults that have happened in the past that are potentially continuing within our organisation. And we are doing a great job, but we need to do better around these issues to build trust. And I'm going to give you an insight into a piece of work that I'm involved in the United States, where they are working to build trust, post George Floyd, really trying to build trust in their community. So here's me. I don't know if you can spot the fresh-faced 19-year-old boy who joined the police in 1987. And I often say that, when I joined policing, I wanted to lock up the bad people. I wanted to arrest the criminals and put them to court and, find them guilty, allow the courts to find them guilty. And yeah, we need policing, but we also need to look longer term. Policing on its own is not going to solve our issues. We need good prevention focus. I spent the last 9 years of my policing career as a chief inspector with the Scottish Violence Reduction Unit, and it really transformed my thinking around issues of violence, around abuse and domestic abuse. You know, from day one in policing, in the 1st of June 1987, I was learning about domestic abuse. I was talked to by organisations about the problem of domestic abuse. When I was operational, I attended calls addressing domestic abuse. And back in the 1980s and 1990s, you can probably imagine that we really didn't understand what was going on in that relationship. And we would just quite often just tell people to be quiet, just keep it down, or we take people away and we separate the individuals, but we really didn't understand what was going on behind the closed doors. And from day one, as I said, I dealt with these issues right through my career. I dealt with domestic homicides as a detective. And in the violence reduction unit, I started to look and learn more about the issue of domestic abuse and what we need to do, I think, to prevent it for the long term. The risks that we have in society, first of all, the risks are here already. We have high levels of domestic abuse, and we know that a lot of cases of domestic abuse are not reported to the police. We saw in the last 18 months with COVID, we saw that wave of COVID coming across Europe, but we also saw that wave of domestic abuse coming across Europe into the United Kingdom and around the world. I'm doing some work with the United Nations just now, working in the Caribbean. I'm not going to the Caribbean, unfortunately, but working online. Similar issues, and they're doing some great work under the Spotlight Initiative to really start to equip police officers with the right skills to be able to address these issues. So domestic abuse is here. It's here. We often, look at times of the year or football where we see these increases, and we talk about these increases, but domestic abuse is happening all the time. Yes, we see, increases in reporting it at Christmas time or after certain football games. In Scotland, we talk about the Rangers and Celtic. We have increases in reporting, but domestic abuse is here already. The risks are here already. And this second risk, wider societal violence. One thing I learned in my years with working with the Violence Reduction Unit is that the best time to prevent violence is in those first 1,000 days of life. And that includes the 9 months in the mother's womb. And for me, that's why domestic abuse needs to be a top priority for policing in this country. Here's a quote that I often use: there will never be peace on our streets until we have peace in the home. In fact, I would go on to say there'll never be peace in the world until we have peace in the home. If you think about lots of the stabbing incidents that we see around the UK, in London and Birmingham and in Glasgow, whilst we are seeing a great reduction in levels of knife carrying and violence in Scotland, we still have issues, and we're not being complacent about that. But the backstory to lots of the issues that we have is rooted in trauma, early years trauma, young people who have been exposed to violence and abuse in their families, through their caregivers, living in that stressful, toxic environment, leading to toxic stress, high levels of cortisol, and unborn children coming into this world, into the war zone, born in, if you come into a war zone, you'll be quickly turned into a warrior. And this notion of adverse childhood experiences. Now, please don't think that I think it's inevitable that people who live in these relationships will go on to be victims of domestic abuse or perpetrators of domestic abuse, because the evidence says that's not the case, but we can't ignore the impact of early years trauma. So I think it's really important that we don't just think about the now for domestic abuse. The problem is here, but we really focus our efforts in addressing this problem, because if we don't, we're just saving up issues in the future. And I think that's why if we can really address domestic abuse, we could reduce demand on policing in the long term. We could keep our officers safe. We could reduce the exposure to violence in our streets that have been experienced by officers if we really get to grips with the issue of domestic abuse. And for me, one thing I learned in the Violence Reduction Unit was to think differently. If I was at a conference with you live today, I'd probably be asking for a sturdy chair and I'd be standing on it to make the point that we must look at things differently, because if we keep looking at things in the same way, we're going to keep responding to the issues, and we must constantly look at things in a different way. And one thing I've learned to do is think differently and look differently at different issues. Now, here's an image that I use in my trainings, and you're probably thinking, what is Graham going to talk about now? Again, I'm looking at things. I've started to look at things, different things in this world and in the news and the media, and I start to see things. So here's an image that you will look at. You'll see 3 chimneys. You'll see a chimney in the middle that's falling over. You'll see the chimney on the right-hand side that's got flames underneath it, and you'll see the chimney standing on the left. Now, turn these into people. These are the 3 types of people that we will come across in incidents that we deal with when it comes to violence. Can you see the people? I don't know if you're just thinking I've gone slightly mad in these last 18 months working in this small office. This is what I can see. Okay, I can see victims of violence, the chimney falling over. I can see the perpetrator of violence, the angry chimney with the flames underneath it. And I just see the other chimney, the person standing by. Victims of violence need to feel supported, need to be supported by us as a system, by the courts, justice system, by the police officers going along and understanding victims and believing victims and investigating situations. But do we as friends, as work colleagues, have a role in supporting our friends who may be victims of domestic abuse? I think we do. The most powerful thing that any one of you could say to a friend, a family member who discloses abuse, you see them being harassed or whatever, is that wasn't your fault. It's a simple thing that we can do. I saw what happened to you. You didn't deserve that. The chimney on the right-hand side, the harm doer, the perpetrator, they need to be held accountable for what they do. Fact, by the system in certain cases. But why do we always wait for laws to be broken before we start to speak up or hold people accountable? Surely as friends, surely as work colleagues, we have a responsibility to see behaviors, attitudes, and speak about them. Hey, that's not acceptable. Most people in this world are good. I really hold on to that belief. But a lot of us are silent around language, around banter, and we'll come on to that shortly. So, in my work, I talk about calling our friends in, using that friendship to connect with your friend, but correct them. Connect before correct. Calling our friends in. Hey, I saw what you said there. I'm not happy with that. And I'm your friend, and I respect you enough to let you know about that. Little things we can be doing. So my passion is the third chimney, the chimney on the left, the bystander who is often the person standing by, maybe got the camera out and filming situations. My passion is bringing that bystander into the conversation. Imagine a society where people were able to see things, they saw problems, and you know what? They knew what to do, they knew what to say. I've given you a simple tool today. Hey, that wasn't your fault. A powerful thing that we can really use to validate a victim's experience. Victims blame themselves. Society blames victims. How about just simply removing that blame from that individual? Bystander. You think about this word. What does it mean to you? When you see this term, the bystander, what comes to mind? Just think in your head of a definition, a few seconds. When you think of that term, what do you think about? A lot of us will start to think about the person standing by, the witness, the person doing nothing. Now, here's a definition which I really like. Ervin Staub is a US psychology professor. He's written some wonderful articles, done some lots of research, a godfather for bystander research as far as I'm concerned. Really has looked at academic research, developed academic research about why people do not act. And he talks about a witness who is in a position to know what is happening and in a position to take action. Now that suggests that we can have passive bystanders, people who stand by and do nothing or walking away, or we can have active bystanders. I like to put these two words in front of the term bystander, passive or active. There's no such thing, as far as I'm concerned, as a neutral bystander. You are passive or you are active doing something. And for us to activate bystanders, for us to activate members of society, we need to understand why people do not intervene in situations. And there's a number of reasons why people don't intervene. And start thinking in your head, why are people not stepping into situations? What reasons might they give for not getting involved in different situations? And these inhibitors are really, really important for us to consider. Apathy, is it your business? When does something become your business? It's a question I like to ask in my training. When does something become your business? We have, there's a lack of tools. What do I do in a particular situation? Police officers were given tools. We need to start giving tools to society to do the right thing, because people want to do it. When they walk away from a situation involving a friend and they've done nothing, they feel really bad. Think of a time when you've seen something that was unjust and you didn't do anything. How did you feel after that? So we can give people tools. Ambiguity, what's actually happening here? That's why we need to raise awareness of domestic abuse. What is it? What does it look like? What does it feel like? Developing empathy is really, really important for active bystandership. So let's clarify coercive control. Let's have conversations. The bystander effect, that situation, the more people that are present, the less likely people will step up. Most people think about physical fear. That's relevant, I think, in stranger situations. Yeah, if you see a stranger having a disturbance involving strangers, yeah, you fear that if you get involved, the consequences, you become a victim of, attack, assault. So there's a physical fear. But see, within peer groups, the fear is not so much a physical fear, it's a social fear. It's the fear of being isolated from the group. And here's the thing I've learned in recent weeks is that the pain receptor in your brain that addresses physical pain, for example, touching something hot or you cut yourself, it's the same, that receptor lights up when you're in group situations and you fear being a victim of, being ridiculed by your friend or being isolated from the group, the social fear. The neuroscience says the social fear is as powerful inhibitor as the physical fear. So we need to help our bystanders to become passive, to go from passive to active. We need to help them to overcome lots of these inhibitors. And a question I ask a lot in my training, if my friend is being abused or being abusive, I need to do something. And a lot of my work is focusing on friendships, peer groups, in communities, looking out for people around us. That's where the real reductions in violence will happen, is when we really start to focus on known peer cultures, groups, sports teams, workplaces within the police, and we'll come to that shortly. Because this idea of silence, doing nothing, the standard you walk past, the standard you accept. David Morrison, a past military leader from Australia, made an impassioned plea in his organization responding to an incident many years ago. And not only did he say this, he introduced training into the organization to address it. But what he's saying here is true. The standard you walk past is the standard you accept. Violence and abuse will continue. It will evolve until we have interruption. Without interruption, we will have continued harm. So that idea of silence is a form of violence. In a public health context, silence is the infection that keeps violence going. So we can really start to work to build knowledge in our communities to help them become active bystanders. In my work, I aspire to make people believe that you can make a difference. One person can make a difference. We can provide people with skills, with strategies. We can create a space to practice these skills and strategies. When I say sweat the stuff, what I'm talking about there is making the connection between words and language and other forms of violence and abuse. Just after the Sarah Everard case, I was asked by my brother, Graham, how can I prevent rape and murder? And I said to my brother, I said, Martin, stop thinking about these acts and start thinking about the words, the language, the banter, because that's where violence starts. That's where violence starts. And if we can intervene as early as possible, we can stop other acts committing. We need to develop empathy. That's why it's important we focus on friendship groups, known peer cultures, develop empathy. Because the research says that the more empathy we have, the more likely we will become active bystanders. And that last one, finding our friends. It's really, really important for bystanders to know they have allies. So when you create conversations, what you're doing is you're allowing the pro-social norms to rise to the surface. So it's really important we start to think about helping our bystanders find a friend, find their allies. We need focus. What do we need to be doing here? We need to be focusing. Okay, I've talked about the role of the bystander, but we need to focus, in my view, on men. Violence for me is a man's problem. It's a women's problem, I get that. It's a problem for everybody, but the vast majority of violence and abuse in society is committed by men against men. We look at domestic abuse. Yes, men are victims of domestic abuse, and that needs to be addressed. But we know up in Scotland, 82% of domestic abuse cases involve men as perpetrators and girls and women as victims. We can't ignore that. We don't do it with suicide. we talk about men's suicide, and we talk about that as a specific issue, but we need to get better talking about men's violence against women and girls. Because we leave the active agent out of the conversation, we ain't gonna stop it for the long term. And this is a question that I ask a lot in my trainings. You know, I like creating conversation, cultivate minds, agree, disagree. You know, if I was with you today live, you'd be standing up and you'd be moving to the left if you agree, disagree to the right, unsure in the middle. And every time I use this statement, I get, what about men? And you know what? Yeah, you know what? Men as victims is wrong, but we need space to talk about men's violence against women, because we do have a serious issue. Yes, we have high numbers of statistics around domestic abuse, sexual violence, sexual harassment. It's in the media, our media feeds every single day. And we just seem to be skirting around the issue. We need to call it for what it is, men's violence. I was fortunate enough to be part of the team that developed the Don't Be That Guy campaign in Scotland. I want to play this short 60-second clip for you.
Ever caught the girl dog or whistled at her walking down the street? Ever stared at her in a bus or said to her mate, I'd do that? You ever give a girl a compliment, like nice, and wondered why you didn't get a thank you? Ever slid into a girl's DMs and went ahead and just showed her that? You ever bought a lassie dinner and felt that man owed you something? You ever got 3 shots in a row hoping you'd get a shot of her? Then what? Bundled her wasted into a taxi and took her back to yours. You ever guilt tripped her? Or pressured her? Or pushed her into it? And then left feeling like a lad? And most men don't look in the mirror and see a problem, but it's staring us right in the face. Sexual violence starts long before you think it does. Don't be that guy.
That campaign, for me, is really powerful. Just after the Sarah Everard case, I was speaking on Scottish television about what I felt was needed around engaging men and making the connection between words and language and other forms of violence, exactly what happened to Sarah. And the corporate team in Police Scotland, just what I said filled some gaps for them. And we got together and we worked on that. And what we're saying in that film is 2 things. Most men, the majority of men, don't commit violence and abuse. We know that, not all men. But those first few seconds, we start to look at the words, the banter, the language, and we want to get men to self-inspect. And you know, the feedback we've had from that film has been fantastic. It's about 3.5 million views globally. Lots of men have reached out saying, yep, we get this. But the second part of the film is, right, you get this, what do you do now? We want men to ask this question, where do we draw the line? What are we prepared to accept as boys and men in society? Because I think a lot of boys and men are deeply troubled with what they're seeing out there. And you know, check out the website behind the film, Don't Be That Guy. There's a website there with lots of blogs, other videos that we've made to really raise awareness of these issues, to sort of sweat the small stuff in many ways, to really make that connection between words and language. We need a focus on boys and men. It's missing just now. I think sometimes we lack the confidence because we're thinking, we get this, what about men? You know what, we need to deal with men's victimization, and we can do that. But it doesn't mean we can't have the focus on female victims of domestic abuse. And how do we respond? You know, I think it's important as a policing organisation that we get our investigations right. I know across the country we have some wonderful investigators, but from time to time mistakes are made, and I think it's important that we start to look at upskilling all officers, not just investigators, but all officers around things like coercive control and domestic abuse, so they can learn to ask the right questions. I was part of a team training Police Scotland a few years ago. Every police officer was trained in the domestic abuse matters course. And I know some forces in England have been doing that as well. And we would really help officers to ask important questions like, how does it feel to be in this relationship? Rather than what happened and what's happened tonight or today, we would ask the question, tell me how you feel in this relationship. Why is that important? Because coercive control is terrifying. And when you arrive at a scene, you will not always be met with the scene that you expect. And for me, we need investigations. We need to really focus our officers on why domestic abuse is really important. What's in it for them to deal with this issue, and to make it a real priority. Because I said, excuse me, I said at the start, we can reduce demand if we get domestic abuse right. We can reduce trauma in the early years. Upskill our officers around coercive control. Give them the knowledge to ask the right questions, to look for the red flags. Every contact needs a trace. Locard's principle, detective principle. We need to equip our officers with the compassion, the empathy to believe victims of domestic abuse, to trust what they're saying is accurate, excuse me, and respond to these situations. And that trauma-informed approach, keeping victims safe. Do you feel safe? No, you don't, right? And that's another red flag I need to deal with as an investigator. And perpetrator focus, keeping the focus on the actions of the perpetrator. We need to build trust. This is a big topical discussion just now in the UK around trust in policing. We've lost it. Some call bad apples. I don't like the term bad apples. It suggests inevitability. I tend to use the phrase harm doers. And we've seen that. We've lost some, there's been trust lost in policing. The vast majority of police officers come to work and they do a good job. And we've seen all of these issues. And I put this up here because, yeah, we need to feel uncomfortable, folks. We need to be uncomfortable. We need to move forward. And one way that we can do that is peer intervention, the bystander as well. You would think as police officers, we're highly trained, but see in certain situations, especially involving within the organization, where it's susceptible to all the inhibitors as any other members of the public. I'm part of a team in America delivering active bystander for law enforcement, the ABLE program. Post George Floyd, peer intervention's become a big thing. If one police officer had spoken up in Minneapolis and challenged Eric Chauvin, we wouldn't be speaking about George Floyd. And there was simple things that could have been done before the incident and also during the incident as well. So we're training officers to be active bystanders, to look out for their friend. That loyalty, that sense of loyalty that we need police officers to have with each other, we need critical loyalty. And this program is not just focusing on misconduct, it focuses on mistakes, it also focuses on mental health issues as well. We need a program that focuses on not just one specific area, all of these issues, make it relevant to the whole organization. And at any given day, we're going to have our officers coming to work. The vast majority will just do a really good job. Within our organization, we already have moral rebels. And we saw that in recent cases involving officers who've pled guilty to taking pictures. We saw it in Scotland as well, where an officer challenged the behavior, reported an incident. So we have a small number of moral rebels in place who do the right thing. We have a small number of harm doers who come to work and cause harm to our organization. And then there's the rest of us. And we're susceptible, potentially, to join in with the poor behavior. We're susceptible to do nothing and walk away from situations. But there's opportunity for us to, with some responsibility, for us to do the right thing as well. So we can really, ABLE program focuses on the rest of us. How do we equip officers with the right tools to be able to do the right thing? So I just wanted to give you some words of wisdom from a retired police officer. The risks are here. There's no doubt about that. The risks are here. The long-term threats, there'll never be peace in our streets until we have peace in the home. We need to engage the bystander, engage our communities, give them tools. Don't just expect them to speak up, step up. We need to help them, give them the tools, give them the strategies to be active bystanders. In many ways, to be good friends, to be good neighbors, to be good work colleagues, teammates, whatever. We need to bring in men into the conversation. We need to invite men into the conversation, not indict them. Men often feel, as men, we get very defensive. So find ways to invite men into the conversation and just watch us speak up around these issues. And we need more men speaking up with the moral courage to speak up, to challenge behaviors. Our response is so important as policing, as police. Our investigations need to be correct, trauma-focused, perpetrator-focused, and we need to equip our officers to be able to say the right things, ask the right questions, to really support the victim and the children, who in many ways are victims as well. In parent intervention, equip our officers. After the Hurricane Katrina, the New Orleans Police Department introduced parent intervention training, and it was in the back of high levels of misconduct and a lack of public trust. And within a year of introducing EPIC, they saw a building of trust, an increase of public trust, and a decrease in misconduct issues. Parent intervention is so important. We give our officers the skills and tools to do the right thing. So that's just some words of wisdom from me, Graham Golden. I am a bit of a Twitter addict on social media, so feel free to follow me. There's my email address if anybody wants to get in touch with me to have a conversation. I'm here to talk, here to share my experience and what I think is needed. So thank you very much for listening, and maybe meet some of you in the future.
That's great. Thank you all so much for your patience, and what a fantastic presentation. You agree. Our final speaker for today is Detective Superintendent Matt Pilch. And Matt is the LRO for domestic abuse within the Met Police. So Matt, welcome and thank you for your time today, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Polly. So hi there, hi everyone, I'm Matt Pilch, I'm a Detective Superintendent and I'm the lead responsible officer for domestic abuse in the Met Police, and I've been in role since January this year. Relatively new in role, learning really quickly, and I've got some interesting thoughts around domestic abuse. Thankfully, I think what I'm going to present will bring together an awful lot of what we've all been spoken out about, and maybe that's not by luck, because I think we're all aware of the issues, and a lot of them blend into one another on how we can improve. So Richard talked about the volume, the impact of the volume on policing. Then we talked about individual experiences and where we focus our effort. And then the previous speaker was talking about how we can improve as organisations. And I think a lot of that will come out in my presentation. So Karen, have you got the slides up and running? You can share them. Or shall I share them, Karen?
Can you see them?
Yeah, great, thank you. Can you go onto full screen for them? Just the presentation mode at the bottom, I think maybe it is.
Yes, it's not. I'm afraid it's not.
Yeah, okay, fine, okay. All right, so I'll talk to the slides and obviously go along as we do. But so scale. So Richard, I think we're maybe twice the size as Richard's facts and figures. So these are figures from 2020. So 150,000 domestic abuse incidents. That's maybe not just a crime, but a call for police, a call for help. And some of that is not what we call a non-crime domestic, where an argument is taking place within the home. Maybe not criminal offences taking place, but then we still have 95,000 or more domestic abuse offences last year in the Met Police. In terms of scale, that's 15%, so 1 in 8 calls are domestic abuse related in the Met Police. Almost 20% of all the murders in the Met Police are domestic abuse related, and almost 20% of all the suspects in the Met Police are domestic abuse related. 67,000 individuals who we've got a crime alleged against them. So you can actually see my note pages there as well. I'm not sure we should do that, but this domestic abuse is incredibly difficult area to investigate, because the victims are in a really difficult position around they feel conflicted. We don't always have the evidence to proceed, and we're doing the best as we can to prosecute as many cases as we can. But in my presentation, I just want to draw out the fact we do more than just prosecute, and talk to that as well. So next slide, Karen. So I'm projecting ahead. So the last 5 years, domestic abuse has gone up 5% every year. So if it continues in similar fashion, in 2025, 26, I'll be looking at 120,000 plus offences in the Met Police alone. And I'm going to work with those figures until I'm told otherwise. And going back 5 years, it's been a 5% on average increase. and I'm not seeing that much change effectively, and they're going to keep rolling with that. So next slide. So this is a bit of a busy slide, and apologies, but on the left hand side you've got of our 68,000 offences, you've got our makeup of the offender. So 24% are the ex-boyfriends, 14% are the boyfriend, 12.5% of the husband, and then we start getting into familial abuse that Richard spoke to, which we deal with as well. So the son of the victim, 8%, and then you keep going down. In terms of risk, in 2020, you can see that a third or so of our volume was familial in nature, as in family members, son on mother, uncle on family member. And we deal with that. We deal with that within our investigative units as well. So when we talk about domestic abuse, it's a massive spectrum and similar risk profile as well, as in standard risk, medium risk, or high risk. About a third, if we've got a third of the volume is familial, a third similar risk profile in those areas as well. The difficulty we face is that we've had domestic abuse, intimate relationship murders. Some 52% of the individuals involved in those offences, victim or suspect, are not known to us. We've had no previous contact. Even if we have had a contact with them, as in known to police, it might not always be known for domestic abuse, but a large proportion are. Having said that, we also know that if we don't know if I contact with these individuals, certainly other agencies will have had 44%. Be known to other agencies, children's social services, adult services, health, rather than us. So there'll be a footprint there around concerns within the family. A growing area for us is to understand suicide within domestic abuse, and I think that'll be a conversation in the coming years. And we're focusing in on this now to understand the problems in that area. And the question of me and all of us is, how do we focus our effort to achieve the best outcomes, and what do we mean by focusing our effort, and where do we focus our effort? But maybe we can draw that out in the questions. So what are the Met Police doing about it? Bearing in mind everyone's got an opinion on the Met Police at the moment, and we are in a difficult position. I'll go through some detail around what our approach is. My background, as I said, is counter-terrorism, and I've taken a similar approach around that. So some of the labels I'm using you'll see within terrorism. So next slide, please. So pursue, that's used in terrorism. So that's where we go after the offenders, and the previous person spoke about that, locking up the bad people. So 45% of all domestic abuse suspects are arrested. Richard spoke to the fact that we'll have different crimes being committed, which leads to that gap, and we don't arrest everyone for domestic abuse, but almost half of the offenders do get arrested. And in the Met Police, if the offender is in front of you, 80% of the time the offender will be arrested, and that's that positive action playing out. So that's a good news story that I think we need to get out more. We've created predatory offender units in the Met Police, and they're only a year old, but 2,000 high harm offenders have been arrested. So that's almost equates to 6 arrests a day for high harm subjects. 2/3 of that will be, or 60% will be around domestic abuse offences, and you can see the figures there. And the actual prosecution rate for these offences dealt with by these officers is really high compared to our prosecution rate in other areas. Executing warrants, and we're doing all the things that you see in other policing areas, firearms, drugs, gangs. We're applying the same methodology for domestic abuse. We're also targeting the top 5% of those causing the most harm in the NPS, and we've got a list of them, and we know who those individuals are around domestic abuse. 1 in 10 people are prosecuted, as in go before a court. Positive action is taken against them, but that's going down. And I think Richard referenced the issues around that, and that's a bigger debate involving partners, Crown Prosecution Service, and the criminal justice process. But having said that, the CPS will charge 70% of cases, and we do get a 70% plus guilty plea rate so we don't have to go through a trial, and we need to start getting that message out that victims do come forward. More often than not, they will not be required to give evidence at court. Also, what are we doing? So next slide. So if we can't arrest people, we will look to protect them. So the top left-hand corner is our domestic violence protection notices and domestic violence protection orders being issued by the courts. And that's going up and up and up, and that's an exponential rise. So if we have a violence issue and we can't prosecute, we will look to serve a domestic violence protection notice to buy the victim some time to say, we're here to protect you and we will enforce this condition. The domestic abuse bill will take that to domestic abuse protection orders because they have to be violence related at the moment. So that's a positive step. So the Met Police are about 17% of all those in the UK, volume wise. And then the bottom right hand corner is the stalking protection orders. And we account for a third of all those issued in the UK. And that's a good news story that we need to celebrate as well. So if we can't prosecute, we will look to protect. Next slide. How else do we protect? Well, we're using technology more and more and more. So you can Google this company, Tech SOS. We're using an app where we've got 1,200 apps in the Met Police. We can put them on victims' phones and they can alert us to concerns. We know who they are, we know where they are, and we can respond in a really timely manner. The image in the middle is an alarm that we're using more and more of in the Met Police, and we'll put these in the home of victims, and they can call 999 by pressing a button, but it's also an audio recording alarm, so it passively records what's happening in the home with the consent of the victim 24/7. When the button is pressed to say that they're in need of police, it will capture the audio recording for the previous 5 minutes, capture that disturbance, capture that abuse, capture that domestic abuse, and we can use that as evidence going forward to prosecute offenders. And we are using that material, and it is helping us prosecute. So we're looking to use more and more of those to protect people in their own homes with their consent. Next slide. So we're also looking to prevent offences from occurring. So knowledge is power. So you'll be aware of the Domestic Violence Disclosure Scheme, Clare's Law. So the top line tells you that victims are not coming forward maybe as much as we would expect them, and that's something that I need to look at. The volume of requests is fairly steady. The bottom line, however, shows that police right to know, that's where we will proactively disclose that we've got concerns about the individual they're in a relationship with. We will actively disclose. So we're doing more of that, and we're 50% up on last year. And I want my officers to do more and more of that so victims are empowered and can respond appropriately within that relationship, leave it, or however they want to manage the risk. The line below is a bit I've had to force this in picture-wise, but it's a domestic abuse app that our officers go to the scene and then they click on the app and it takes them to wherever they are, the relevant Borough Command Unit, and they click on that. Not only does it give them policies and advice and guidance, it'll give them all the local support agencies which they can then email or print out for the victims, so they know who to link into live time when we've left. And they've got that support that they can start reaching out to. So that's a really good innovation in using technology to support victims to prevent further offences and build the confidence of victims. Next slide. So this is what we're doing with the probation service, is that we are starting to attack offenders who are released on licence for their conviction. And if we tag them with electronic monitoring, we can put exclusion zones in, so you can't enter these areas, and also we can track where they've been should we need to prove an offence, should an offence be recorded. So this is real work with the Home Office, work with probation to give a wraparound service that it's not just when you serve your sentence, we forget about you, but we're still monitoring you and we're still protecting victims. Clearly, our work will prove there's evidence basis for this, because we have recalled people back into prison for offences being committed, and I would hope that this rolls out further to protect victims and gain more confidence. Next slide. Prepare, another terrorism analogy. So this is where we need to make sure we're in the best position to respond. So we spoke about training for our staff. Like Scotland, we're rolling DA matters training. So we've done 6,800 frontline emergency responders, so they've got better empathy, victim awareness, awareness of how the perpetrator tries to manipulate us to get to, so that win favour with us. And I'm looking to invest further in that. Our detectives have now got their own bespoke course around the DA domestic abuse investigations to look at coercion and control and draw out the evidence so we can have evidence-led prosecutions. And also we're looking to improve the culture of our own organisation and our own investigators who investigate our staff. So that's what we're doing in a nutshell, and hanging it on pursuing offenders, protecting the victims, preparing our staff and preventing further offences. I know some of this is working, but I've had a recent input from the Welsh Violence Protection Unit, and I think it feeds in some other conversations we had earlier. And they've got an evidence base that the following things work around violence against women and girls. So if you just come on to the next one. So these things work for them, and they will work long term for everyone. There's strong evidence that if we put in place programs, we'll see changes in behaviour in school settings, college settings, sports clubs, adolescent settings, school-based interventions, adolescent violence. So we do need to put the work in now, so that I am not dealing with the 120,000 further offences that I'm predicting that I may be dealing with in 2025. So I'm working with the Home Office, and I'll be showcasing this going forward. The Department of Education that I'm doing a presentation with next week. The final plea for me is that the Met Police is the focus of policing in the UK. We have published the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. We're doing a lot of work that I've just shown you in relation to domestic abuse, but the wider violence against women and girls agenda. My final slides are in relation to that, and I want your feedback as people involved in London and the issues within London. So the next slide is what our approach will be to increase trust and confidence in the violence against women and girls agenda. So this is what we want to do. We do have to focus on putting people before the courts to win back that confidence. Our detection rate has declined. Maybe we're looking into it. Maybe we're involved in other areas we shouldn't be involved in, and we need to go back to basics a little bit. Improve the victim care within the criminal justice system, so that we do have more convictions. The trials are successful, and we do prosecute more. Stop this repeat victimisation that we see. Increase the confidence. Increase the reporting. We do want people to keep coming forward. We see that as a success. But we know we've got an internal issue that's been spoken to, and we're actively seeking to address that. Some of the things we're already doing is on the next slide. So we are looking to protect people in open spaces and in the home. The focus in the Met Police recently has been around public space violence, knife crime, gang crime, adolescent crime. We know we need to bring this into the home as well. I know a lot of our robbery offenders have had adverse childhood experiences involving domestic abuse. So if maybe we can stop the domestic abuse in the home, we can stop those other offences that we see happen. Prevention, victim care that I've spoken to, bring more offenders to justice, and I've mentioned some of those elements, and then improve our own culture. So the next slide is some words from the Commissioner, that we are really keen to improve, and we must improve. Those in London on this conference, I've asked you to give your feedback in relation to this plan. And this feedback will feed the national policing response to violence against women and girls as well. The Met Police has got a big say in national policing. So if we can get our own policy right, we will say that the national policing need to adopt similar approaches. Sorry, I've rattled through that really quickly, but I'm more than happy to take questions. And over to yourself, Polly.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much, Matt. Really, really appreciate the insight into what's happening within the Met. I know we're slightly overrun by about 10 minutes, but at this point, I would just like to say a huge thank you to all our speakers and to invite Dr. Victor Olisa to take over for the panel discussion. Victor, hi, great to see you.
Hi, Polly, can you hear me?
Yeah, you can.
Brilliant, brilliant, thank you. Just want to start by saying a massive thank you to all our presenters. I'll do that when we come to the end of the panel, but we move on into the panel discussion, and I'd like to start from where Matt finished, which I think it's a great position to be in, that the Met is asking not only this panel, this conference, people at this conference, but the wider public to feed into a really important area in terms of developing their strategy and policy for violence against women and girls, which I think it's, you know, for me, it's the epitome of actually community engagement, community dialogue, and having feedback on something that's so important. From all my guests, the first questions I'm going to pose to you, having listened to all your brilliant presentations, the first one I'm going to pose to you, and I'll make some of this specific, is what can we do now to reduce the risk of violence to women and girls? And I'm conscious of Graham's presentation when he talks about there is violence against men, and we understand that, but the quantity is significantly less than violence against women and girls. I'm going to ask you, what can we do now to reduce the risk of violence to women and girls? But I'm going to be a bit more specific. So, Christine, I'm going to ask you to just cover the point. You talk about the preventative element, and you quoted the military personnel is saying 70% is the time to take action. If you wait 5 or 10% more to get more information, then you talk about life and death. How can we use that in a way that gets all the partners involved and victims in preventing, reducing the risk? Daisy, I want to ask you to actually look at the migrant women and your really powerful presentation. How can we get the authorities to be more receptive to the plight and the barriers that migrant women face? And Matt, I just want to focus on one element of your presentation. You talk about 45% of all domestic abuse suspects are arrested. And you talk very rightly about your specialist officers who have got more skills and will delve into the investigation. But 55% of DA suspects are not arrested, and those arrests comes with frontline officers who don't have those specialist skills. How can we incentivize them to arrest more people? So I've got specific there to the question, but you know, whoever wants to go first, then please dive in. Daisy, Christine, or Matt.
Yeah, well, I can go first regarding the code that we talked about. In behavioral analysis, one gesture or one indicator is not enough to validate the situation. We all notice, okay? So we have to add other information to be really sure of what is happening in front of us. But the first indicator has to be seen. If the first indicator has not been seen, we are we are passing away from the goal. We have to see one gesture. From one indicator, we start to analyze the other indicators, and then we go fast at this 70% of assurance to be sure of what is happening in front of us. We just have to accumulate indicators, words, and tone of voice. But we don't have to wait that it's going to be validated scientifically and everything. We're not there. It's going to explode in front of us. So we have to see the first indicators, and then we go for the others, and then we say, okay, I have enough indicators now, we're on it.
Thanks, Christine. And in practical terms, when you're doing those training, are you seeing those training have an impact on victims? I mean, in one of the other presentations, I think it was Elizabeth saying that for migrant women, they experienced 35 incidents at least before the report. So having that preventative measure is really important, because we don't want the victims to suffer anywhere near 35 incidents before the report. Are you seeing any of your training having an impact where victims are coming forward much sooner and actually saying, I've been a victim, I now see the signs, and I think it's going to happen to me, and I would like some help?
Absolutely. And I have a close friend of mine who had this training, and she was not into a situation of domestic violence, but she wanted to take this training in case of, just to prevent. And she was facing someone in a specific situation, and the person, as one of the gays I listed earlier, one of the gays, and she saw this gaze, and she said, okay, I have a red flag right here. This is really strange that he's focusing like me, like this on me for so many minutes. It's really weird. He's thinking about something, he's acting weird. I'm gonna wait a little bit to see other indicators. And because only of this gaze, she said, okay, there is a problem. So she's not with this person anymore, but she asked this person, you know, do you want to do a therapy or something, to maybe we can build something together? Maybe you were just angry or something. And the man said, no, I don't need any therapy. So she knew at that point that there is, you know, no coming back. So she knew that she saw the gesture, the good gesture indicator. Oh, we cannot hear you anymore. You're on mute. Yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah.
You think after 2 years I'd get used to actually unmuting myself. Thank you, Christine. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Daisy, Matt, who'd like to go next?
Yeah, Victor. Hi, Victor. I can come to mine if that helps. So, our officers are taking positive arrest at the scene 80% of the time. If the perpetrator's in front of them, they will arrest. 45% of the time we arrest overall, so that does leave a gap of 55%. Over recent years, our officers are getting the fact that we take positive action around arresting. My concern is that the arrest approach has consequences, that if we arrest everyone for domestic abuse, the impact of arresting everyone means that it damages our ability to respond all the time in the right way. So if I have 100% arrest rate for high risk incidents, I'll be really happy with that. And equivalent going down, I think our approach is that we just arrest because it's domestic abuse related. And I think we have to be a bit nuanced around that. Use the arrest for standard risk crimes, but understand the impact of arresting everyone. And I'm within the Met Police, so I want to take us to a more risk-based approach around arrest, because I'm concerned that if we don't actually use the dash, use that formal risk assessment process and respond to it appropriately with arrest, we're undermining our efforts. Does that make sense, Victor?
Yeah, it certainly does, Matt. And in a way, that was probably what I was trying to get out, in the sense of just the simple presentation of the figures of 45% and 80% doesn't go behind that explanation, which is the thing that goes about reassuring survivors, victims, and other partners. There's not just a simple activity. There's lots of other activities and consideration that goes around in the background, which is useful. Thank you. Daisy?
Hi, Victor. I think, you know, from a migrant women perspective, when we talk about domestic abuse against migrant women, we must keep in our mind that currently there is a two-tier system in the UK. As a protections rely on immigration status. Most perpetrators know this. So if a victim does not have any access to public funds, they have no other choice than stay. So in other words, perpetrators have kind of like a license to act with impunity. Even when they have access to public funds, it is very difficult to escape because the first thing a victim have to do is to prove their immigration status, to apply for benefits, to rent a property, to open up an account. Perpetrators, most of the time, they know this. So this is why the first thing they do is to take away documentation on destroyed passport or identity cards. And one thing that we need to consider is that Home Office application or documentation replacement are very unaffordable for victims. We also need to consider factors such as racism and xenophobia. What we need to happen is that we need to start considering those factors that intensify the experiences of migrant women. For example, one thing they need to happen as well is about the sharing information between the police and the Home Office. So we need to stop prioritizing immigration investigation over the regional criminal investigations such as domestic abuse or rape. I also believe that, likewise, minority group organizations need to be supported more effectively because in terms of resources, because these organizations provide a service to Black and minoritized women that generic information the organizations cannot provide. So we need to start thinking about all those factors that intensify the experiences of migrant women and how difficult it is to actually escape domestic abuse.
Thank you, Daisy. Holly, just check for me. I did see a message about West Midlands Police. I'm not sure is Richard still with us or did he leave earlier?
Richard had to leave earlier.
Okay, that's fine. I just didn't want to miss him out on the panel discussion in case he was sitting there and he thinks I'm ignoring him. If I come back to the next questions to our three remaining panelists, which is what are the risks we can see coming and what can we do about them? And again, I just want to make it specific to the three of you. So what are the risks we can see coming and what can we do about them? Christine, one of the things that we experience here, and maybe it's the same in Canada, but same police officers, when we get trained, when we're in that training environment, the world is wonderful and rosy. But when we move out of the training environment into the operational field, then we revert back to this is the practical thing to do. Is there a risk with your training not being translated by the professionals into practice to make it change? Matt, I want to ask you, you talked about the number of reports of DA increasing and possibly 150 to 125,000 in a few years' time. Again, that's a risk that we see coming. What are the thoughts, the plans to actually prevent, reduce, or at the very least reassure those victims who are possibly like to be victims that the authorities are going to be there to protect them in the best way possible? And then Daisy, the political talk around migrants at the moment is toxic, to describe it, in the most lenient way. How do you see that having an impact on a group of potential victim survivors who are facing so many barriers at the moment in the area of domestic abuse? Kristen, if I can ask you to go first, please.
Yeah, can you repeat the question? Sorry, I didn't hear because of the noise. I'm so sorry.
No, it's fine. So I was saying one of the things that we experience as police officers, when we get into a training environment, the information we receive is brilliant. But when we move out of that training environment, go to the operational field, that training almost disappears. We go back to this is the best way to carry out policing. So I'm saying in your training of specialists, are they able to turn what they receive in the training into practical outcomes to get the best way of protecting victims?
Yeah, and the beauty of behavioral analysis is that we can practice right away. So we have a lot of videos to analyze, to analyze the questioning also, or the discussion, and then create questioning and everything. So when you go into the operational field, well, you can use it. It's all the same thing. So it's really easy to go on the ground and do the same thing. The questions are usually the same. You see the same gesture because you practice it. So it's why it's not like intuitive, or it's not like we have to go with the flow. Is you practice it during the training, and then when you are in the real life, it's the same thing. Yeah, but between my two trainings, they have to practice anyway, so they have to come back with real information.
No, that's brilliant. That combination of theoretical knowledge and practical application seems to be having a real strong effect in actually making the training more effective.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant, thank you. Matt?
Yeah, so it's probably multifaceted. So our response in the short term to reassure victims is as I've outlined. I don't think we talk about enough about how we protect in other ways other than arrest. So I need to do that in the Met Police. Not all victims want to prosecute; they just want it to end, and we can help them end it. In the medium to long term, if I'm faced with 125,000 offences in 2025, I really do need the organisations online to help give the police insight on where we're going to focus our effort. So my background is terrorism, and in dealing with terrorism, we work with MI5, and they give us great insight, great support, knowledge, asset to understand the threat and deal with the threat appropriately. And I'd like to see the same approach in domestic abuse, using the agency's experience, insight, knowledge, understanding, empathy to work with us to prosecute the right cases, make sure the ones that we don't prosecute are getting the right support, and manage the demand that way. I fear that we're trying to approach all domestic abuse in the same way, and maybe we're overselling and under-delivering. And I'd like to be a bit more nuanced with that, working with the agencies on a more formal basis. And I think there's a long way to go on that, but that's my thoughts personally as the lead in London.
No, and I guess one of the important things in trying to achieve that, Matt, is that the other agencies see domestic abuse at the same level of priority as the police do.
Yeah, very much so. And I think this is gathering legs. There's obviously violence against women and girls conversations, COVID throwing us through a spotlight on domestic abuse. The time is now to keep the progress happening. I'm worried that the funding position for agencies is really difficult though, and there's no long-term plan for individuals, agencies, third sector to get that long-term support so that I can engage them on a proper basis like we would with MI5. That's kind of undermining everyone's position, and that's a really difficult place. But I think there's room to go with working better and closer with agencies in police stations for the benefit of victims.
Brilliant, thanks, Matt. Karen, can I just put you on warning to play that video by Gordon after we finished received Daisy's response to the question of, what are the risks and what can we do about them? Daisy?
Yes, hi, Victor. I think in terms of the risk and the impact is about, if the investigations are concentrated in first in addressing or establishing the immigration status of a victim, we have to take in consideration that it has been estimated that a victim experienced 35 assaults before actually reaching help. In the cases of migrant women, the number is higher. So if a victim approaches the police to actually ask for help, and that the priority is to establish if this person has the right or not to live in here in the UK, obviously it's going to impact how this person will be approached then in the future to the police. It's going to impact the fact that this person feel like they're going to be supported. So it is very important that we consider that this immigration sharing data with the Home Office, it has a dramatic impact in migrant women and how they actually can report and escape abusive relationships.
Thanks, Daisy. Excuse me, Karen's going to show the video that's been made by Gordon, and then I want to end by asking our three panelists to address this question briefly at the end before we finish at 1, which is how do we build trust and confidence in this difficult time? Christine, in terms of you, how do we build trust that training, theoretical and practical, will lead to confidence in victims, survivors, and their families? Matt, how do we build trust in the police service and in the Met at the moment in light of some really challenging public criticism that the Met have received, and you alluded to it? And Daisy, how do we build trust in the migrant community, particularly migrant women, their families, their children, that the authorities, the institution and society will protect them from the abuse that they're receiving from partners? So if I just ask you to think about that while we watch the video, and then we'll have probably about 2 or 3 minutes in the end, I'll just ask you to address those before we finish the conference.
Look old doll. Or whistled at her walking down the street. Ever stared at a woman on a bus or said to your mate, "Don't do that"? You ever give a girl a compliment, like nice, and wondered why you didn't get a thank you? Ever slid into a girl's DMs and went ahead and just showed her it? You ever bought a lassie dinner and felt that meant she owed you something? You ever got her 3 shots in a row hoping you'd get a shot of her? Then what? Bundled her wasted into a taxi and took her back to yours? You ever guilt-tripped her? Or pressured her? Or pushed her into it? And then left feeling like a lad? Most men don't look in the mirror and see a problem, but it's staring us right in the face. Sexual violence starts long before you think it does. Don't be that guy.
Thank you, Karen. And I think in Graham's presentation, he gave an explanation of how he came about getting involved in making that video, which is, even second time around in a short space of time, is still just as powerful as it was the first time we saw it. So coming back to my question, my final question to the panelists, how do we build trust and confidence in this difficult time? Christine, can I start with you again?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, that was a really powerful video. That's a great video. So for the question, I have 2 little points. First, to build the trust and confidence, it's to show to victims that our helping timeline is building all together really close, and we are including them into our strategy to help them. So they are part of it, and we have a good timeline. We are really working together, and we believe her also. It's really important. And the second part, really fast, it's the indicators. Giving them the tool to analyze right away is giving them confidence to act really fast.
Thank you, Christine. Matt?
For me, Victor, I think it'd be absolute transparency on what policing does in the complex world of policing. Domestic abuse is one element. It's a fifth of our business in the Met Police. We do have other pressures, political pressures, social pressures, media pressures, and I'd be really transparent and saying, come and look at how we work, come and look at the amount of effort we put into this on a day-to-day level, inexperienced detectives, inexperienced officers, and the experienced, the amount of investment we put in, the innovation we're looking to do, and the fact that we need help around this. You remember, Victor, when you in your previous role, if you got to see the amount of issues that policing face with on a borough command unit over a 24-hour period, I think people would understand policing and the pressures a lot better if they could see those reports, if they could see those incidents, and then they start to understand the pressures we're under and how we do seek to do the best with limited resource.
No, absolutely, Matt, and I'll touch upon that in my closing there. Thank you to everyone. Daisy?
I think we have to keep in our minds that each perpetrator always designs their own strategy to keep power and control. So something that they need to happen is to begin to understand the experiences and of migrant women and acknowledge those experiences, because we have to create that connection with the communities. And then, the police have to work closely more with, with migrant communities and support organizations. And it is about acknowledging their experiences and how the experiences may diverge from others. One thing that we actually have to be conscious about domestic abuse is that one side does not fit all. Each experience and each victim have their unique experiences. So we have to start to consider that. And then it is about that. It is about having sympathy. It is about having understanding. And it is just about, doing the right thing.
Thank you, Daisy. So we've got 3 minutes just to, I won't use all the 3 minutes, and Polly, you might want to come in and say some bits in the end. Just to thank our speakers, Christine, a massive thank you for bringing some science to this area that's been, in my experience as a police officer, has been really subjective, from cultural norms of men feeling as though they can treat women as chattels, even in the Western world, to just trying to get professionals to take this seriously, because it's a lot more complex and a lot more difficult than just running off and arresting someone and running away. You have to deal with the emotional side. So I am really, really, and the conference is much richer for you bringing some science to this that works at every level, from victims, survivors, to the professionals.
Thank
Matt,
you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. It's not an easy task to actually come onto a conference, a public forum, and speak on behalf of a big organisation and actually say, you know what, we're not perfect, we're learning, but we want to learn with you, we want to work together, and we want to protect, that very Peelian principles in the sense of prevention is better than detection, 180 years on, and you're still learning, and that takes some real professional courage. And as the word you use, transparency and building trust and working together in terms of partnership. So presentation is great. You pointed out the challenges, but you didn't point out the challenges to say it's too difficult. You pointed out the challenges to say we can all work on this together. The Met will take his role as the professional lead, but work in consultative mode with the people of London and far beyond. So thank you very much for doing that.
Thank you.
Daisy. Thanks, Matt. Daisy, words do not describe your presentation. The bravery, the eloquence, the power in actually sharing your story with us. So not in a way that you wanted sympathy, but in a way to say we can all learn from this. And 99% of everything that you said mirrored the academic finding, but putting it into a personal perspective really, really is powerful. And if anyone in a professional capacity, in a supporting role, don't take anything away from that to make a change, then that person will be in the tiny, tiny minority. Thank you very much. And to our other speakers who are not here, Richard, really eloquent presentation of the challenges that the police face and the increasing number of DA. Great stuff. Gordon, powerful video. I couldn't have guessed that you weren't there when you were delivering that, so I'm hoping you're listening to this afterwards. Really interactive, really informative, really engaging. And Elizabeth, just that work around looking at the legislation, what the small group is trying to do to influence change at the policy level, really, really commendable. And to the audience, for those of us who joined us, who will probably have to leave early and probably watch this afterwards, and those who are still with us, you've made the conference, and I want to thank you for giving up your time, joining us, and being engaged in the chat room, in the comments, and for those who pose questions, for posing questions, really wonderful. And then finally, I just want to say a massive thank you to Karen for all the organisation, for Polly for chairing, and for everyone else involved in the preparation of this conference, which has been a good day. And then one final bit: if anyone's affected by any of the issues we've talked about, then there's support available and support services available to anyone who's affected. Just send us an email and we will be able to support you, direct you, point you in the right direction. And for any feedback, anyone who wants to give us feedback, it's really, really helpful. We'll welcome it. It'll